The Vatican has always been a place that holds countless secrets, many of which we still know very little about. But what if I told you there are some things you probably shouldn't hear because once you do, they might change the way you see everything? What hidden truths are buried deep inside the Vatican? That's exactly what we're going to uncover in today's video. So fasten your seatbelt as we dive into today's mystery. But first, you'll have incredible luck if you like and subscribe before this video ends. The Forbidden Black Magic Book. Among ancient texts, the Grand Grimoire, also known as the Red Dragon, stands as one of the most feared and controversial books ever mentioned in Western legend. According to oral traditions and scattered archaeological references, this is an ancient manuscript said to contain rituals for summoning demons, including the name of Lucifer himself. The true origin of this book remains a mystery to this day. Some scholars believe it first appeared in the early 15th century, while other researchers argue that the earliest version was printed only around the 18th century or even later. Most of its content is thought to be based on pseudepigraphal texts attributed to King Solomon, the biblical figure believed to possess supernatural knowledge and to have commanded spirits to serve under his authority. Inside the book are formulas, invocations, and rituals intended to summon entities from the invisible realm. But what makes the Grand Grimoire truly remarkable is not just its content. It is the deep concern surrounding its actual existence and the question of where the original might be stored. According to many rumors, an original copy of this book is being kept inside the Vatican's top-secret archive. Some believe this act of preservation is a form of control, meant to prevent dangerous knowledge from falling into the wrong hands. Others believe the Church needs to study and understand what it is up against. However, there is no official documentation confirming the presence of the Grand Grimoire in the Vatican. It is all rumor, but it is a rumor that has endured for centuries. UFO and the Vatican. In recent times, discussions surrounding unidentified flying objects have shifted from being dismissed as fiction to becoming a subject taken seriously by both governments and the scientific community. And one of the most attention-grabbing figures in this movement is David Grusch, a former intelligence officer with the United States Air Force, who once served in the Unidentified Aerial Phenomena Task Force. David Grusch doesn't just talk about aliens. He shocked the world with a claim that the Vatican once held the remains of a UFO that crashed in Italy just before World War II. According to Grusch, sometime in the late 1930s, a mysterious flying object was said to have fallen near the town of Magenta, close to Milan in northern Italy. At that time, Italy was under the rule of dictator Benito Mussolini. Grusch alleges that Mussolini ordered the site to be kept secret and had the wreckage hidden for years. But what made Grusch's claim particularly striking was the detail involving the Vatican. He stated that after World War II ended, Pope Pius XII secretly informed the US government of the UFO's existence, and the United States then organized a covert operation to retrieve and transport the object back to America for classified study. No clear information has ever emerged about where the object was taken or what was discovered from the craft. And of course, the Vatican has never confirmed any of this. When asked about evidence, David Grusch said he had accessed classified documents and spoken directly with individuals who were present at the time of the UFO recovery. However, due to security restrictions, he could not release names or specific documentation. Many people remain skeptical of his statements. Some argue it may simply be another conspiracy theory, lacking verifiable proof. But there are also those who believe that if there were any institution in the world discreet and influential enough to keep such a secret hidden for nearly a century, the Vatican would certainly be one of them. If the Vatican did witness an event capable of reshaping humanity's understanding of life beyond Earth, then why have they kept it hidden from the world? For now, we have no answer. But the Vatican's enduring silence only makes this mystery harder to explain than ever before. The Vatican's time machine. There's a strange story the Vatican has never officially confirmed, yet never fully denied either. It's the tale of a time machine known as the Chronovisor. The story begins with an Italian priest named Pellegrino Ernetti. He was a scholar of sacred music and an exorcist. In the 1960s, he claimed that he had been part of a secret group within the Vatican, a team made up of priests and scientists. Together, they reportedly built a special device that allowed its user to view past historical events, as if watching footage recorded from centuries ago. Father Ernetti said that he personally used this device to witness the crucifixion of Jesus Christ. He even claimed to have taken a photograph of the moment. However, the image was never authenticated. No one else ever saw the chronovisor, and the Vatican has never released any evidence proving that it exists. Despite the lack of proof, the story has continued to spread within circles of paranormal research. Some believe that if the chronovisor were real, it could be a dangerous tool, especially if it were to fall into the wrong hands. With such a device, someone could observe and even manipulate history or create fabricated evidence to serve their own agenda. Others argue that Ernetti may have invented the whole story simply to draw attention, but regardless of its truth, the chronovisor remains part of a long list of unresolved mysteries tied to the Vatican. The city of the dead beneath the Vatican. Hidden deep beneath the grandeur of St. Peter's Basilica lies an entirely different world. It is an ancient city of the dead, a necropolis lost in silence, shadow, and centuries of forgetfulness. This place is known as the Vatican Necropolis, located about 5 levels beneath the current floor of the basilica. Here, archaeologists discovered a vast burial ground dating back to the 1st century AD during the height of the Roman Empire. The earliest tombs belonged to pagan Romans, those who had not yet heard of or accepted the Christian faith. Higher up, researchers uncovered another burial layer, dated to around the 5th century. This was a critical transitional period in the religious history of Europe, as Christianity slowly began to replace ancient pagan beliefs. In this area, they found tombs with blended features, pagan symbols placed side by side with Christian crosses, a testament to a time when two spiritual worlds coexisted. What has been found in the necropolis is not merely archaeological debris. It tells a complex story of faith, of historical transformation, and of the link between death and salvation. In a stunning twist, among these ancient structures, researchers also uncovered the remains of a medieval church lying directly beneath the floor of the present-day St. Peter's Basilica. This suggests that long before the modern basilica was built, the site had already served as a sacred and religious center for centuries. The basilica we see today is, in truth, only the uppermost layer of a legacy built over 2,000 years. At the heart of the entire complex is a special chamber that the Vatican believes contains the remains of St. Peter, the apostle regarded as the first pope. Though the theory remains debated, it underscores the profound significance of this site to both the history and the faith of the Catholic Church. Today, the necropolis is more than just an archaeological relic. It is a living monument to how religion and power were built, layer by layer, stone by stone. Beneath the grand architecture and sacred light of the church above, a silent world still endures, a world where untold stories remain buried in the darkness, waiting to be discovered. The mysterious death of Pope John Paul I. In September 1978, the Catholic world was shaken by an event unprecedented in modern history. Pope John Paul I died suddenly, just 33 days after being elected as the successor to St. Peter. He was known as a humble, modest man, and in that short time he had already won the love of millions of faithful around the world. But it was his abrupt passing that opened the door to a series of questions that have never been satisfactorily answered. Initial reports about the cause of his death were riddled with contradictions. Some claimed he suffered a heart attack while sleeping. Others insisted that his health had been perfectly stable up until the moment he died. And to this day, no official autopsy has ever been performed. John Paul I was seen as a reform-minded leader. Although he had not yet announced any official plans, many believe he was preparing to confront one of the darkest corners of Vatican affairs, the Vatican Bank, which had long been suspected of being at the center of numerous financial scandals spanning decades. According to several researchers, the new pope had begun asking difficult questions about the Vatican Bank, and those questions may have placed him in real danger. At the time, one of the most powerful figures managing the Holy See's finances was Bishop Paul Marcinkus, the head of the Institute for Works of Religion, better known as the Vatican Bank. Under his leadership, the bank became entangled in a web of accusations involving money laundering, shady investments, and massive unexplained loans. Tied to these scandals was Roberto Calvi, a central figure in Banco Ambrosiano, an Italian bank whose collapse would later send shockwaves through the financial world. Calvi was a member of P2, a secretive lodge accused of manipulating politics and finance in Italy. In 1982, his body was found hanging from a bridge in London. Though his death was officially ruled a suicide, suspicions of assassination have never truly gone away. Marcinkus himself was later investigated and accused of complicity in the bank's collapse, which resulted in losses totaling $3.5 billion. Though no official evidence has ever been produced, many believe that Pope John Paul I had become a threat to powerful interests. One theory suggests he was poisoned to prevent any potential purge of the Vatican's financial network. What adds to the suspicion is the fact that the Vatican refused to allow an autopsy, and the flow of information surrounding his death was tightly controlled. To this day, the death of Pope John Paul I remains one of the great unanswered questions in the modern history of the Church. Did he die of a natural heart attack, or had he opened a door that others never wanted touched? We may never know the truth, but sometimes it's the things that are hidden that demand the deepest reflection. The Egyptian obelisk at the heart of the Vatican. In the center of St. Peter's Square, a towering column of stone rises into the sky. This is the Vatican obelisk, one of the square's most striking monuments, and also one of the oldest symbols still standing in the Vatican today. Yet few people realize that this stone pillar did not originate in Rome, nor was it erected by the Church. It came from somewhere far older, from an ancient city on the banks of the Nile, once the center of sun worship in Egyptian civilization, known as Heliopolis. This obelisk is over 3,000 years old. It was originally raised by the Egyptians to honor their gods. It once stood beneath the burning African sun, a silent witness to the solemn processions of pharaohs. But in the 1st century AD, the infamous Roman Emperor Caligula, one of the most brutal and notorious rulers of the empire, ordered the great stone monument to be brought to Rome. He had a special ship built solely to transport the obelisk across the Mediterranean, treating it as a trophy of conquest and a symbol of imperial power. It was erected at the Circo di Nerone, a circus arena where some of the earliest Christians were put to death in brutal public executions. According to historical records, St. Peter himself was executed at this very site, just a few steps from the obelisk. For a long time, the Romans brought Christian believers to this place and executed them in the shadow of the Egyptian stone, a cruel mockery of their faith. Centuries later, as the Circo di Nerone fell into ruin, the ground around the obelisk gradually became a burial site for Christian martyrs. That sacred ground would eventually become the foundation upon which St. Peter's Basilica was built. It was not until the year 1586, under Pope Sixtus V, that the obelisk was moved to its current position at the very center of St. Peter's Square. Relocating a stone that weighed more than 300 tons was a feat of engineering unlike anything the world had seen. Over 900 workers, hundreds of horses, and an elaborate pulley system were mobilized for months to complete the task. Since that moment, the obelisk has no longer stood as a pagan symbol. It became a witness to the enduring faith of Catholicism, a monument to the triumph of Christianity over violence and persecution. Today, thousands of tourists pass through the square, often unaware that the Egyptian stone before them once stood watch over the spilled blood of Christianity's earliest followers. It is not merely an ancient structure, it is a silent witness, carrying a story far greater than what the eye can see. St. Peter's bones. In 2013, under the dazzling light of St. Peter's Square, a solemn ceremony unfolded. For the first time in history, the Vatican publicly displayed a small stone box containing 8 fragments of bone, bones they believe belonged to St. Peter, the first pope in the history of the Catholic Church. The ceremony was led by none other than Pope Francis himself. For many of the faithful, that moment carried profound spiritual meaning, as if 2,000 years of history had converged into a single point, allowing modern eyes to glimpse a piece of the man considered the foundation of Christian faith. But behind that reverence lies a truth that still remains unverified. Are these fragments truly the remains of St. Peter? The bones were discovered in 1939 during an excavation beneath the floor of St. Peter's Basilica. They were found inside a sealed niche near the location traditionally believed to be the apostles' burial site. However, no independent scientific verification has ever been permitted. In 1968, Pope Paul VI declared that faith is reasonable, but also admitted that conclusive proof could not be provided. In the decades that followed, the Vatican remained silent about the true origin of the relics. According to author Bruno Bartoloni, who spent many years researching inside the Vatican, no pope has ever allowed scientists to examine the bones using modern methods. Some internal documents even suggest that St. Peter's tomb carries a millennium-old curse, and that anyone who disturbs it may face terrible misfortune. Whether the curse is real or not, it's clear that the Vatican has shown no urgency in probing too deeply. Perhaps to them, the spiritual and symbolic value of these bones outweighs the need for scientific validation, or perhaps the truth is something the Church is not prepared to face. the Pope prisoners. The story begins in 1871, when the Kingdom of Italy successfully unified the nation and moved to seize the Papal States, vast territories that had been under the Pope's control for centuries. With the aim of secularizing the country, the Italian government passed the Law of Guarantees, promising to protect the dignity of the Pope while simultaneously stripping the Vatican of its political authority. For Pope Pius IX, the head of the Church at the time, this was unacceptable. He refused to recognize the new government, declared himself a prisoner in the Vatican, and issued a decree of excommunication against the king. From that moment forward, the Pope would not leave Vatican grounds, and the Italian state would not step inside. A political deadlock began, one that would last nearly 6 decades. During that time, the popes lived, worked, and carried out their religious duties within the confines of just a few hectares of Vatican land, completely severed from official contact with the rest of Italy. The Vatican became a world unto itself, isolated, enclosed, and symbolically at odds with the nation surrounding it. It was not until 1929 that the standoff finally ended. The Lateran Treaty was signed between Pope Pius XI and Italy's then leader, Benito Mussolini. The agreement recognized the Vatican as an independent, sovereign state with full political and diplomatic rights. In return, the Church agreed to relinquish its claims over the lost papal territories. The Lateran Treaty not only resolved nearly 60 years of tension, it laid the foundation for the modern Vatican as we know it today, a tiny state with immense global religious influence where the Pope is no longer seen as a prisoner, but as a sovereign head of state. Jesus' death certificate. For centuries, the Shroud of Turin has remained one of the most debated and captivating religious artifacts in the world. It is not just an old piece of cloth, it is a symbol of suffering, death, and the undying hope of millions of Christian believers. According to tradition, this was the cloth used to wrap the body of Jesus after his crucifixion. Imprinted faintly on its surface is the image of a man bearing wounds that match the descriptions found in the Bible. The shroud was first officially recorded in 1354 in France, and since then it has become the focus of endless research, debate, and reverence. In 1988, 3 independent laboratories used radiocarbon dating to determine the age of the fabric. The results were shocking. The cloth appeared to date back only to the 13th or 14th century, hundreds of years after the time of Jesus. For some, it was clear evidence that the shroud was a medieval creation, perhaps a ritual object or a symbolic work of art. But for the Vatican, the story did not end there. In a later study, Barbara Frail, a researcher from the Vatican Secret Archives, claimed to have discovered faint traces of writing on the surface of the shroud, something no one had noticed before. Through high-intensity image analysis, she said she could make out fragments of text in ancient Greek, Latin, and Hebrew, arranged without clear structure but repeating the same message. This is the burial shroud of Jesus of Nazareth. According to Frail's theory, the cloth may have served not only as a burial covering, but also as a rudimentary death certificate. In Roman times, it was not uncommon to affix or write identifying information directly onto burial shrouds. The inscriptions, she suggested, might have been hastily written by an official after the execution, confirming the identity and cause of death. Even so, her discovery has not gained broad acceptance in the scientific community, partly due to the ambiguity of the evidence, and partly because the shroud has become too sacred to subject to further testing and controversy. For the Vatican, the cloth no longer needs to prove anything. Its value does not lie in scientific conclusions, but in the depth of faith it continues to inspire. The Pope escape tunnels. Hidden among the ancient stone structures and high surrounding walls of the Vatican is a passage that almost no one notices, a quiet pathway running along the fortified perimeter. It is known as the Passetto di Borgo, or more dramatically, the Pope's escape tunnel. From the outside, it appears unremarkable. Just a long stone wall, like hundreds of other medieval defenses scattered across Europe. But within it lies a narrow corridor stretching nearly 800 meters, connecting the Vatican directly to Castel Sant'Angelo, the former mausoleum of Emperor Hadrian, later transformed into a papal fortress and sanctuary. Construction of the Passetto di Borgo began in the 9th century under Pope Nicholas III, and it took more than 6 centuries to complete. It was more than a feat of architecture. It was a strategic declaration that in times of instability, the head of the church needed a way to escape, and at one point in history, that escape route would prove to be a lifeline. In the year 1527, Rome plunged into one of the darkest chapters of its past, the sack of Rome by the forces of Emperor Charles V. the city fell into chaos. Churches were looted. Monks, worshippers, and innocent civilians were slaughtered in the streets. Amid the anarchy, Pope Clement VII was forced to flee for his life. The Pasetto became his only means of survival, carrying him out of the Vatican in secrecy and safety. Today, the tunnel still exists, occasionally open to the public on special occasions. Walking beneath its shadowy arches, hearing your footsteps echo against the ancient stone, you don't just feel the weight of history. You can almost picture the moment a pope once rushed through the darkness, searching for the light. Vatican and the secrets buried beneath. Beneath the very stones of Vatican City lies a vault of knowledge preserved through the centuries. It is known today as the Vatican Apostolic Archive, though until recently it bore a name far more evocative, the Vatican Secret Archive. The renaming, initiated by Pope Francis a few years ago, was meant to dispel the cloud of suspicion and intrigue that had long surrounded its contents. Yet the change in name could not erase the deeper question that continues to linger. What secrets is the Vatican still hiding? This archive is believed to contain millions of pages of documents spanning over 1,200 years, from papal decrees and diplomatic correspondence to court records and obscure chronicles of mysterious, even inexplicable events. Some believe it holds texts recounting encounters with extraterrestrial beings, records of supernatural miracles, and fragments of forgotten knowledge from lost civilizations. The Vatican claims that the archive is now open to scholars. In theory, anyone can submit a request to access the original materials. But in reality, it's not so simple. The application process is rigid and highly selective. Not everyone is allowed in. And even for those granted access, only a small fraction of the vast collection is available for viewing. Some documents have indeed been made public. These include, for example, the transcript of Galileo's 1633 trial, or the letter written by Mary, Queen of Scots, to Pope Sixtus V just before her execution. These reveal the immense historical value of the archive, but they also raise a sobering question. If these alone were enough to shake our understanding of the past, then what secrets lie within the materials that remain sealed? Today, the Vatican is attempting to digitize portions of the archive, but the progress is painstakingly slow, simply due to the overwhelming volume of material. According to some scholars, the most unusual records, those referring to UFO sightings or unexplained phenomena, likely remain tucked away in corners of the archive that few are ever permitted to enter. One researcher once remarked, "It's not that the Vatican doesn't have documents on strange events. The problem is they no longer know where to find them." Some have likened the Vatican Apostolic Archive to a kind of CIA vault for the Church, a place where what gets released to the public is merely the tip of the iceberg, while the most significant pieces are kept carefully and permanently hidden. Is the Vatican truly concealing great secrets about history, religion, or even life beyond Earth? We may never know for certain. But one thing is clear. With 53 miles of shelves packed with records, there is still a great deal the outside world has never seen. The True Cross. Among the religious relics said to be the most sacred within the Vatican, few spark as much debate as the True Cross, the piece of wood believed to have once held the crucified body of Jesus Christ. According to Catholic tradition, after the execution of Jesus, the cross was preserved and eventually divided into smaller fragments. One of these fragments is now kept at the Vatican, displayed as a holy relic that draws thousands of pilgrims each year. Legend has it that the original cross was made from 3 types of wood: cedar, pine, and cypress. Some texts even claim that the 3 trees had grown together on a sacred plot of land that had once held the foundations of the Temple of Jerusalem and later became the source of the cross itself. It's a story rich in symbolism, but one question continues to stir controversy. How can anyone be sure that the remaining wood is truly part of the original cross? To this day, there is no definitive scientific evidence confirming the artifact's precise origin. Modern tests, such as carbon dating, have never been publicly conducted on the surviving fragments. Part of the reason is that the Church seeks to protect the sanctity of the relic, and any form of testing would require taking samples, something that could cause irreversible damage. Outside the Vatican, numerous churches and monasteries around the world also claim to possess pieces of the True Cross. According to some researchers, the number of fragments currently claimed would be enough to reconstruct several dozen full-sized crosses, raising serious doubts about the authenticity of each individual piece. And yet, for many believers, the value of these fragments lies not in whether they are made of the actual wood, but in the faith surrounding a sacred story that has endured for over 2,000 years. For them, to witness an object believed to have touched Christ is, in itself, a deeply spiritual experience. The Vatican and the Holocaust. For decades, the Vatican's role during World War II, especially under Pope Pius XII, has remained a deeply controversial subject. Many scholars and historians have criticized the Pope for maintaining silence as the Nazis carried out their brutal genocide against the Jewish people. In the eyes of many, the Vatican's silence during this dark period equated to complicity. Why, they ask, did the Pope not publicly denounce Hitler's atrocities? However, recently uncovered documents have begun to offer a different perspective. A list of 3,200 Jewish individuals who once lived in Rome was discovered within the archives of the Pontifical Biblical Institute. According to the documents, these individuals were hidden in monasteries, convents, and other Catholic institutions within the city after Nazi forces occupied Rome in 1943. The list has been verified by Rome's Jewish community with support from Yad Vashem, the Holocaust Memorial in Israel, as well as several Catholic universities. The evidence suggests that when Jews were expelled from the Roman ghetto, many were not deported to concentration camps, but were instead sheltered within religious institutions at the very heart of the capital. This may be the clearest evidence yet that the Vatican offered help, quietly, behind the scenes. Still, not everyone sees this as an act of pure compassion. According to some researchers, many of these religious institutions only agreed to offer shelter on the condition that the Jews convert to Catholicism. This raises a troubling question. Was the Vatican acting out of mercy, or was it seizing a moment of chaos to further religious conversion? Some argue that Pope Pius XII chose to act in silence to avoid Nazi retaliation. They believe that had the Vatican openly condemned Hitler, the consequences could have been even more devastating for Catholics across Europe. Others are not convinced. To them, silence in the face of evil, no matter the reasoning, cannot be justified. To this day, the Vatican's true role during the Holocaust remains an unsolved puzzle. The newly revealed documents shed light on one part of the story, but also raise difficult questions. Was the Vatican a bystander, a silent hero, or simply an institution trying to navigate between power and morality? Wherever one stands, this remains one of the most complex and sensitive chapters in the long and troubled intersection between religion and war. The Ark of the Covenant. Throughout the history of religion, the Ark of the Covenant has been regarded as one of the most sacred and powerful objects ever crafted by human hands. According to the Bible, it was the wooden chest used by the ancient Israelites to house the stone tablets bearing the 10 Commandments. The Ark was said to be made of acacia wood, overlaid with pure gold both inside and out, and topped with 2 golden angels whose wings stretched over the lid. During the Israelites' long journey through the wilderness, the Ark was not only a religious symbol, it was believed to carry the very presence of God, capable of bestowing blessings or unleashing divine wrath. But around 587 BC, when Babylonian forces invaded Jerusalem and destroyed the first temple, the Ark of the Covenant abruptly vanished from all official records. Since then, its fate has become one of the greatest unsolved mysteries in religious history. Some scholars believe the Ark was destroyed in the invasion. Others insist it was hidden away, safeguarded before the enemy arrived. And among the more provocative theories, there are those who suggest that the Ark may now lie deep within the Vatican's vaults. Why then is the Vatican often drawn into this mystery? One of the main reasons lies in the uncanny similarities between the Ark of the Covenant and the sacred chests found in ancient Egyptian religious rituals. Egyptian ceremonial boxes, especially those used in processions of the gods, were also crafted from wood, coated in gold, equipped with side handles, and often adorned with divine beings such as the god Anubis or winged creatures. Researchers like Scott Buehler have noted that in the tomb of Pharaoh Tutankhamun, archaeologists discovered a ritual chest that closely matches the biblical description of the Ark. Could it be that the ancient Israelites borrowed the concept from Egyptian culture? Or was there a deeper spiritual connection between these two great civilizations? If there is any organization in the modern world with the power, resources, and secrecy to preserve such a sacred artifact for thousands of years, it would be the Vatican. Of course, the Vatican has never confirmed nor denied having the Ark of the Covenant in its possession, but silence, as so often happens, only fuels the mystery. Many believe that if the Ark still exists, it is being kept in a place of unparalleled security. The fake mummy scandal at the Vatican. The Vatican museums are home to one of the largest collections of ancient artifacts in the world. Within its vast halls are treasures from Roman sculptures and ancient manuscripts to Egyptian relics thousands of years old. Among the most notable displays are the Egyptian mummies, exhibited in the section dedicated to the Nile civilization. But a recent discovery has cast doubt on the authenticity of some of these sacred relics. At least a few of the mummies at the Vatican may, in fact, be fakes. The story began in 2015 when a group of researchers conducted X-rays and CT scans on 9 mummies exhibited at the Vatican museums. The procedure was routine, part of a scheduled preservation assessment. But when the images appeared, something unexpected was revealed. 2 of the mummies did not contain the remains of children or animals as previously labeled. Instead, wrapped tightly in linen were the bones of 2 adults, a man and a woman, dating back not to ancient Egypt, but to the Middle Ages, sometime between the 14th and 15th centuries. In one case, researchers even discovered a rusted nail from the 19th century lodged between the bones and the wrappings, seemingly placed there to hold the structure together. These were not authentic Egyptian mummies. They were 19th century fabrications, products of an era when Europe and America were swept up in what historians now call mummy mania. During this period, owning an Egyptian mummy became a status symbol among aristocrats and academics. Demand outpaced supply. And so, a market for fake mummies was born. Antique dealers began wrapping the bones of more recent human remains in old linen, sometimes even repurposing fabric from damaged real mummies and selling them as ancient Egyptian artifacts. These counterfeit relics found their way into museums and research institutions across the globe, remaining undetected for decades. The Vatican was no exception. The revelation that fake mummies had been on display in the Holy See's most revered museum surprised the public and raised troubling questions about the authenticity of other historic relics. If forgeries can find their way into a place as sacred and prestigious as the Vatican, then what might be happening in museums elsewhere around the world? Yet, it is important to recognize a crucial point. The Vatican did not deliberately deceive the public. In the 19th century, verifying the authenticity of artifacts was largely based on appearance. Technologies such as X-rays or carbon dating simply didn't exist. Acquisitions were made based on trust and the perceived credibility of the seller. Emperor Nero's bathtub. When people think of the Vatican, their minds often go straight to St. Peter's Basilica, ancient manuscripts, or Michelangelo's masterpieces. But few are aware that hidden deep within the exhibition halls of the Vatican museums lies an object no one would expect: an ancient Roman bathtub once belonging to Emperor Nero, crafted from one of the rarest stones on Earth, Egyptian purple porphyry. This type of stone, known as porphyry by the Romans, could only be quarried from a single site buried deep within the Egyptian desert, in a region once under Roman control. That quarry has been depleted for over 1,500 years. Today, attempting to recreate a tub of similar size and material would cost an estimated $2 billion, not only because of the rarity of the stone, but also due to the extraordinary craftsmanship required to carve it. Nero's bathtub was not merely a lavish fixture. It was a symbol of absolute power and the decadent lifestyle of one of Rome's most infamous emperors. To the ancient Romans, porphyry was not just a luxury material. It was a stone reserved for royalty, used to pave temple floors, construct imperial thrones, and, in Nero's case, to bathe like a god. The Vatican doesn't just house Nero's tub. Wandering through its vast corridors, visitors can also find mosaic artworks depicting Roman athletes, dating back to the 3rd century. These rare pieces are some of the few surviving testaments to a time when sport was not merely entertainment, but a reflection of culture, discipline, and national pride. These mosaics were recovered from the baths of Caracalla, a massive public complex that once welcomed thousands daily. That such opulent artifacts of the Roman Empire are now housed within the Vatican may surprise some. But in truth, after the fall of the empire, the Catholic Church emerged as its spiritual and cultural heir. Over time, many relics were gathered from ancient Roman ruins and brought to the Vatican for safekeeping. Nero's bathtub is just one small piece of that immense legacy. The altar of Moses. According to the Bible, after leading the Israelites out of Egypt, Moses ascended Mount Sinai to receive God's laws. But before he went up the mountain, he performed a very specific ritual. At the foot of Sinai, Moses built an altar using uncut stones and erected 12 stone pillars, each representing one of the 12 tribes of Israel. He then offered animal sacrifices, sprinkled the altar with blood, and even cast some upon the people, sealing a sacred covenant between them and God. To many, this episode is a powerful part of Scripture. But to others, it has long been viewed as symbolic, a religious myth with no archaeological evidence to support it, until recently. At Jabal al-Lawz, a mountain located in the northwestern region of Saudi Arabia, a group of independent researchers uncovered a curious stone structure. Shaped like an L, the structure was made entirely from rough, unworked stones. There were no steps, no constructed platforms, and no signs of modern building techniques. In nearly every detail, it resembled the altar described in the Book of Exodus, the very one Moses was said to have built. Nearby, they discovered 12 round stone pillars, each about 23 inches in diameter. The stones were neatly arranged close to the altar, leading many to believe they could represent the 12 tribes of Israel. Inside the altar area, researchers found layers of ash, animal bones, and traces of partially burned organic material. Preliminary analysis suggested that these remains could be the remnants of ritual sacrifices, strikingly similar to the offerings detailed in biblical accounts. Despite the attention this discovery has received, the Saudi Arabian government has rejected any connection to biblical events. Instead, they maintain that the area once belonged to the Nabateans, an ancient civilization known for their mining operations and stonework throughout the region. According to the official narrative, the pillars are simply remnants of an old quarry, and the bones could be the result of domestic activity or cooking by Nabatean workers. Yet many Western researchers strongly disagree. They argue that the location, layout, building materials, and especially the number of stone pillars are too specific to be mere coincidence. Some have gone so far as to suggest that Jabal al-Lawz may in fact be the true Mount Sinai, not the traditionally accepted site in Egypt's Sinai Peninsula. If the altar at Jabal al-Lawz truly is the one Moses built, this could be one of the clearest archaeological confirmations of a biblical event ever found. Of course, no major archaeological institution has yet officially endorsed the discovery, and the site remains difficult to access due to political restrictions. Still, for many, the evidence already uncovered is enough to reignite belief. The fallen popes. To many, becoming pope seems like the pinnacle of sacred authority, a position both holy and untouchable. But history tells a far more dangerous story. Of the 266 men who have sat on the papal throne, at least 42 have died under mysterious or unusual circumstances. Some were executed, others poisoned, and a few perished in bizarre accidents. These deaths are a stark reminder that no matter how divine the office may appear, power has always come with a price, especially in a world shaped by politics, betrayal, and revenge. One of the strangest tales in the Church's history is that of Pope Formosus. He died in 896, and one might have expected that to be the end of his story. But not long after, his successor, Pope Stephen VI, ordered Formosus's body exhumed, dressed it once again in papal vestments, and placed it on trial in a bizarre proceeding known as the Cadaver Synod. The corpse was declared guilty. 3 fingers, those believed to have blessed the faithful, were cut off, and the body was thrown into the Tiber River. The episode is so real, so grotesque, that historians still debate its motivations and the depth of internal hatred within the medieval Vatican. Alongside these macabre deaths were popes who led lives of decadence and scandal, tarnishing the image of the Church. Sixtus IV, who reigned from 1471 to 1484, was infamous for appointing relatives to powerful church positions and was rumored to have fathered several illegitimate children. Alexander VI, better known as Pope Rodrigo Borgia, remains one of the most controversial figures in papal history. He held lavish feasts inside the Vatican, maintained multiple mistresses, and used his position to elevate his family's influence. Then there was John XII, who ascended to the papacy at around 18 years old and was said to have turned the Vatican into a house of debauchery. He died while committing adultery with a nobleman's wife. Some say he was beaten to death by her husband. Others claim he suffered a stroke during the act. Other popes met more unexpected fates. John XXI, a pope deeply interested in medicine and science, died when the ceiling of his study collapsed on him while he was working. He survived for a few days before succumbing to his injuries. Urban VI, meanwhile, reportedly fell off a mule and died from the accident. His death was not mysterious, but it remains one of the least dignified ends for a man once regarded as the supreme leader of the Church. These stories reveal that the papal throne is not only a symbol of divine authority, it has also been at times a seat of political intrigue, personal tragedy, and human vulnerability. The highest office in the Church has come at a steep cost for some. And while the Pope is called the Vicar of Christ on earth, history reminds us that many popes, despite their titles, were still men, driven by ambition, and often undone by it. Homosexuality in the Vatican. The Vatican is the global seat of Catholic authority, often portrayed as a bastion of solemnity, tradition, and conservatism. But behind those centuries-old walls, there is a story many believe the Church has tried to keep hidden for years, the story of homosexuality within the Vatican itself. In 2019, French journalist Frédéric Martel published a book titled In the Closet of the Vatican. The book was the result of a 4-year investigation, drawing from more than 1,500 interviews with cardinals, priests, former clergy, and even Vatican security personnel. In it, Martel made a stunning claim. 80% of the clergy working within the Vatican are homosexual. According to him, many of these individuals live in secrecy, concealing their true identities. What's more striking is that some of the loudest voices condemning homosexuality in public are the very same people living double lives. They denounce the LGBT community from the pulpit while engaging in same-sex relationships in private. Martel described this as a long-standing culture of hypocrisy embedded within the heart of the Church. The Vatican has not directly denied the statistics presented in the book, but it has also offered no formal acknowledgement. Some sources have noted that Pope Francis once told a survivor of sexual abuse, "God made you like this, and He loves you as you are." That sentiment earned him support from many in the LGBT community, while drawing criticism from more conservative factions within the Church. But the issue is deeper than questions of identity. Experts have suggested that living a double life in an environment as closed and pressured as the Vatican may contribute to systemic problems, such as the abuse scandals and cover-ups that have plagued the Church. When people are not allowed to live truthfully, it can lead to psychological strain and foster a culture where secrecy becomes second nature. As long as the subject remains taboo, the culture of silence will continue to thrive. And when the truth is buried too deeply, it doesn't just damage the Church's reputation, it hurts real people living within its walls. Did the Vatican fabricate 300 years of history? Among the strangest theories ever proposed about European history, one idea stands out for its boldness: that 300 years in our current timeline never actually happened. This idea is known as the phantom time hypothesis. The theory was introduced in the 1990s by a German researcher named Heribert Illig, who argued that the period between AD 614 and 911 was fabricated. According to Illig, Pope Sylvester II, Holy Roman Emperor Otto III, and a few others conspired to insert 3 centuries into the historical record. Their motive? To place themselves in the spotlight at the symbolic moment of the first millennium, the year 1000. If Illig is right, the real year today wouldn't be 2025, but closer to 1725. The theory may sound outrageous, but Illig offered several arguments to support his claim. The first is a problem with the calendar. When Pope Gregory XIII reformed the calendar in 1582, he removed 10 days from October to realign with the solar cycle. Illig contends that if 1,500 years had truly passed since the introduction of the Julian calendar, the correction should have been much larger. He argues that this suggests an extra 300 years were artificially inserted, and that astronomical data doesn't match up to support their existence. Second, Illig points to the written record. He claims that many texts from what is now called the early Middle Ages appear to have been altered or retroactively created. Some documents survive only as copies made centuries later, often written in newer scripts. He also highlights inconsistencies in the historical accounts of figures like Charlemagne, suggesting the emperor may have been exaggerated, or perhaps never existed at all. Finally, he questions the lack of clear archaeological evidence from the 7th to 10th centuries across much of Europe. Illig argues that if those 300 years had truly occurred, there should be far more surviving buildings, tools, and artifacts than what we currently find. But those traces, he claims, are missing. Mainstream historians strongly reject the phantom time hypothesis. They argue that minor discrepancies in the calendar are easily explained by natural errors accumulated over centuries. More importantly, they point to corroborating evidence from other civilizations, including the Middle East, China, and elsewhere, that align with European events from that era. For Illig's theory to be true, virtually every major culture would have had to participate in a synchronized historical fraud, a scenario most consider impossible. Still, the phantom time hypothesis continues to circulate, not because people necessarily believe it, but because it raises a provocative question. If a small group with enough power could alter history itself, would we even know it had happened? The missing books of the Bible. The Bible is the most sacred text in Christianity, a book that for centuries has been read and followed by millions as the divine word of God. But what many do not realize is that the Bible we know today is not the same as it once was. When the Bible was first translated from Latin into English in the early 17th century, the version known as the King James Bible, it originally contained 80 books. But by 1684, 14 of those books were removed from the official version, and since then, they have all but disappeared from public awareness. The 14 excluded texts are known as the Apocrypha, a Greek word meaning hidden or kept away. Among these are Esdras, Tobit, Judith, the Wisdom of Solomon, the Prayer of Manasseh, Baruch, Bel and the Dragon, the Song of the Three Holy Children, and Maccabees. Many of these books contain religious narratives, moral teachings, and prayers that were once considered integral parts of the biblical canon. So why were they removed? Some scholars argue that the content of these books did not align with the church's teachings at the time. Perhaps they contained ideas or accounts that the church wished to suppress in order to keep the Bible shorter, simpler, or more consistent with the doctrine it wanted to promote. Others believe their removal was part of a broader effort to control information and shape faith in a more uniform direction. Yet many disagree with that view. Critics point out that the Apocrypha contain nothing harmful. In fact, they provide a richer understanding of early Judaism and Christianity. Books such as the Wisdom of Solomon and Maccabees were even taught in churches and read during religious services for centuries. Another detail often raised in this discussion is the name of Jesus. In earlier texts, before the Bible was revised, his name was written as Jesus, closer to the original Hebrew name Yahushua. Over time, both the spelling and pronunciation were altered to become Jesus, as we know it today. Some believe this shift was part of a broader effort to Romanize the image of Christ, making it more compatible with Western culture at the time. Regardless of which interpretation you believe, one fact remains undeniable. 14 books that were once officially part of the Bible were quietly removed without clear explanation. For centuries, people have read and believed in what remained, unaware that a portion of God's word may have been hidden or forgotten. The influence of extraterrestrials. In the 1920s, a Russian professor named Genrikh Ludwig claimed he had been granted access to the Vatican's secret archives, a place so heavily restricted that only a handful of people have ever stepped inside. And what he claimed to have discovered there continues to spark controversy to this day. According to Ludwig, the archive is a vast network of corridors and bookshelves stretching for dozens of miles. It holds tens of thousands of documents, some of them dating back hundreds of years, recording key events from European history and other ancient civilizations. But what drew the most attention wasn't political or religious history, it was the mention of extraterrestrials. Ludwig claimed he found ancient texts referencing non-human beings who assisted early civilizations such as the Egyptians, the Maya, and even the Sumerians. These texts, he said, described beings from beyond Earth, teaching humanity how to build cities, develop agriculture, and even invent written language. Some documents allegedly described ancient weapons of immense power, similar to nuclear arms, that were once used in forgotten ages. One passage even claimed the walls of Babylon had been melted by an intense heat source. However, all of this exists solely through Ludwig's personal account. He was not allowed to remove any documents or provide physical proof to back his claims. This has led many to dismiss his story as fantasy, or perhaps a clever fabrication meant to draw attention. Yet despite the skepticism, Ludwig's story aligns with theories that independent researchers have raised for decades. For example, many have long wondered how ancient civilizations could have achieved such advanced engineering and scientific knowledge so far ahead of their time. The Sumerians, in just a few centuries, transitioned from a society of hunters and gatherers to city builders, water system engineers, and inventors of one of the world's earliest writing systems. So the question remains, did they receive help from a source beyond this planet? And if so, could the Vatican possess the evidence and have chosen to keep it hidden all these years? Confronting the devil. For many years, the Vatican remained silent on most matters related to exorcisms. But one man broke that silence, Father Gabriele Amorth, an Italian priest who served as the Vatican's chief exorcist for over 25 years. He was not a hidden figure operating in the shadows. On the contrary, Father Amorth openly spoke about his work to the media. In a 2010 interview, he stated that he had performed more than 70,000 exorcisms throughout his career. To many, that number sounded implausible, but to him, it was proof that evil is real and far more active than most people realize. According to Father Amorth, the devil does not only manifest in isolated or remote places. He believed that evil had, at times, infiltrated the very heart of the Vatican. One of the most serious incidents, he claimed, occurred in 1981 when demonic forces allegedly attempted to attack Pope John Paul II. Years later, on Christmas Eve 2008, a woman named Susanna Maiolo lunged at Pope Benedict XVI during Mass. Security intervened swiftly, and no one was seriously injured. But exactly 1 year later, on Christmas 2009, Susanna returned. This time, she succeeded in knocking the Pope to the ground in front of a stunned congregation. The incident shocked the world. Doctors later concluded that Susanna showed signs of mental illness. But Father Amorth believed it was something more. In his view, Susanna was possessed, a vessel for demonic forces sent to harm the Pope. Of course, not everyone shared his perspective. Many argued that such events should be examined through the lens of modern psychology, not the supernatural. But for Father Amorth, the spiritual realm was ever present. He believed that demons could speak multiple languages, conceal themselves when needed, and act through human beings. Father Amorth passed away in 2016, leaving behind a legacy that remains both revered and controversial. But whether or not one believes in demonic possession, his story continues to raise a haunting question. When reason can no longer explain what we witness, could something else, something darker, be pulling the strings from behind the veil? Unidentified flying object over the Vatican. On a day in June 2007, a strange phenomenon occurred right in the heart of the Vatican. In the sky above St. Peter's Basilica, an unidentified object appeared. Many eyewitnesses who saw it later described a silver-orange flying disc, gently glowing and hovering above the church's dome for several minutes. They described the object as circular in shape, emitting a metallic light, yet making no sound. It appeared silently, hovered in the air for a while, and then vanished, so quickly that no one had time to fully grasp what was happening. What stood out most was that just a few days later, all information about the incident had nearly vanished from public media. The initial photos surfaced briefly on obscure forums and a few online news outlets, but were quickly removed or forgotten. There was no official statement from the Vatican, no public investigation, and no one from within the church came forward to confirm or deny the event. Some believed it was merely a weather phenomenon or a civilian aircraft mistaken for something extraordinary, but others were convinced that the object was not of this earth and that the Vatican may have known this all along. Among independent researchers, there are theories suggesting that the Vatican has a long history of contact with extraterrestrial phenomena. Some believe that ancient manuscripts stored in the Vatican's secret archives contain information about aliens having interacted with humans since antiquity. The 2007 sighting, in this view, was not a random occurrence, but possibly a deliberately arranged encounter between the two sides, carried out in silence. Of course, all of this remains speculation. There is no definitive evidence to confirm any of it, but one thing many people agree on is this: the event truly did happen, and it was quietly pushed aside without a single explanation. The Lost Gospel. For centuries, the image of Jesus Christ has been shaped by what is recorded in the official Bible. We know of his miraculous birth, the wonders he performed, and ultimately his crucifixion. However, there is a period of roughly 30 years in his life that is almost entirely absent from the scriptures. And it is precisely because of this absence that the discovery of a 6th century manuscript ignited considerable debate within academic and theological circles. This manuscript, written in Syriac, an ancient language once used among Christian communities in the Middle East, is believed to be a translation of an earlier Greek original. What made this text controversial was not only its age, but its contents. According to the document, Jesus was portrayed not only as a divine figure, but also as a man with human emotions, personal relationships, and, most strikingly, a marriage to Mary Magdalene. Mary, who is known in the Bible as a devoted disciple, is never officially recognized as Jesus' wife in Catholic doctrine. Yet, the manuscript goes further. It claims that the two had children, and that Mary Magdalene was not merely a companion, but referred to as the daughter of God, and described as a co-savior of mankind. In this telling, her role was not secondary, but equal to Jesus in the divine plan. With such content, it is not difficult to see why this document stands in stark opposition to the teachings of the Catholic Church, which has long asserted that Jesus lived a celibate life, and that Mary Magdalene was a repentant sinner, not a central spiritual figure. Still, there are those who believe the Vatican has long been aware of this manuscript and deliberately ignored or suppressed it to preserve the theological image of Jesus as defined by doctrine. Acknowledging that he may have lived a worldly, human life would change how millions of believers perceive him. It could shake the very foundation of the doctrine that has been built and reinforced over more than 2,000 years. To this day, this lost gospel remains an unresolved mystery, but it does point to one unsettling truth. The history of faith as we know it may be only a fragment of a much greater and undisclosed story. The Vatican Secret Archives. In the heart of Vatican City lies a place where almost no one is allowed to enter. It is the Vatican Secret Archives, a highly guarded section that houses the oldest and most sensitive documents in the history of the Catholic Church. This is one of the largest and oldest secret archives in the world. It is estimated to contain over 50 miles of shelving filled with documents, millions of pages of records, letters, political correspondence, and theological texts dating back hundreds, even thousands of years. But what makes this place truly remarkable is not just its scale, but the way the Vatican controls access to it. For years, only a carefully selected handful of scholars have been granted permission to study the archives, allowed to access only very small portions at a time. Even then, they are not allowed to take photographs, make full copies of documents, or disclose any content that has not been officially approved by the Vatican. It is this strict control that has fueled countless rumors and conspiracy theories. Some believe that within the archives lie the remains of extraterrestrials or strange machines, such as devices capable of time travel. These theories may sound far-fetched, but given the level of secrecy surrounding the archives, they are not entirely implausible. There are even claims that the Vatican is hiding unpublished biblical texts or documents that could fundamentally change the way we understand religious history and the story of humanity itself. While no one has been able to confirm these claims, the Vatican's silence only deepens the public's curiosity. Still, there are some documents that have been verified to exist and are known to be stored within the archives. For example, the final letter of Mary, Queen of Scots, written just before her execution in 1587. Or the records concerning the Church's conflict with Martin Luther, the man who sparked the Protestant Reformation. There are also transcripts from the trials of the Knights Templar, once protectors of the Holy Land, later condemned by the Church as heretics. Even so, these are merely the tip of the iceberg. The unpublished documents remain locked away, and even as the Vatican claims to be opening the archives for research purposes, many believe that the real secrets are being kept elsewhere, in a section the public will never be allowed to see. The highest crime rate in the world. It may sound unbelievable, but data shows that there are between 1 to 1.5 criminal offenses per year for every resident living in Vatican City. That figure is even higher than in cities known for their high crime rates. However, to understand this correctly, we need to look at the bigger picture. In reality, the Vatican is the smallest country in the world, both in terms of area and population. Only about 800 to 1,000 people live there, most of whom are clergy, monks, and security personnel. And yet each year, the Vatican receives more than 18 million tourists from around the world. This creates a huge imbalance in how the crime rate is calculated. The number of incidents is driven by the tourists, but the statistics are measured against a very small permanent population. As a result, the crime rate on paper is inflated to an unusually high level. So what types of crimes are we talking about? Most are petty offenses, pickpocketing, small-scale theft, and minor scams, taking place in or around famous landmarks like St. Peter's Square or the Vatican museums. Thieves often blend in with the crowds of pilgrims and tourists, targeting those who are distracted. They act quickly, discreetly, and are rarely caught in the act. What's important to understand is that crime in the Vatican is not violent crime, and visitors don't need to be overly concerned. It remains one of the safest places to visit, on par with any major tourist destination in the world. In truth, the Vatican isn't a breeding ground for criminals. It has simply become an ideal setting for petty thieves to operate. With overwhelming foot traffic, limited security forces, and no sizable local population, the Vatican has become easy prey for those who target unsuspecting tourists. The mystery of the pine cone and the pineal gland within the Vatican. Amid the grand domes and famous frescoes, there is one detail that often goes unnoticed. It is a massive bronze sculpture of a pine cone. The statue sits in the Cortile della Pina, which literally means Court of the Pine Cone, and within the grounds of the Vatican museums. Standing about 13 feet tall, it is placed at the center of the courtyard, flanked on both sides by peacock statues. For many, it appears to be just an ancient piece of sculpture, but upon closer examination, it carries a very particular meaning. This statue has an incredibly long history. Originally, it was part of an ancient Roman fountain near the Temple of Isis. Later, during the Middle Ages, it was relocated to the old St. Peter's Basilica. In 1608, the Vatican decided to move the pine cone to its current location, where it remains to this day. The pine cone is not the only artifact the Vatican has preserved from antiquity. Many of its structures were once temples to pagan gods before being converted into Christian churches. However, the pine cone is a particularly clear and striking symbol, one that has prompted many questions. What makes the pine cone special is not only its shape, but the fact that it resembles a part of the human brain called the pineal gland. The pineal gland is a small endocrine organ located near the center of the brain. It resembles a tiny pine cone in form and regulates sleep through the hormone melatonin. But in many ancient cultures, the pineal gland was also seen as the third eye, a gateway to deeper awareness or even a connection to the spiritual realm. Modern science is still investigating the full role of the pineal gland, but for thousands of years, civilizations have used the pine cone as a symbol of enlightenment, of life, and of a vision beyond the material world. In Assyria, depictions of gods holding pine cones appear on palace reliefs from the reign of King Sargon II. It is believed the pine cone was used in rituals for purification or fertility. In Egypt, the staff of the god Osiris, the deity of the afterlife, is wrapped with two serpents and crowned with a pine cone. Many interpret this image as a representation of awakening energy within the human body, much like the concept of Kundalini in Indian spiritual tradition. In Greek and Roman culture, the god Dionysus was often depicted carrying a staff topped with a pine cone. This staff was used in sacred rites and represented life, abundance, and connection to the divine. So why would a symbol so closely tied to pagan rituals stand at the center of the Vatican, a place that represents Christianity? Some believe it's simply an artistic and historical relic. The ancient Romans created it, and the Church merely preserved it as part of its cultural heritage. But others suspect the Vatican knows more than it reveals. Perhaps it fully understands the symbolic importance of the pine cone and its connection to the pineal gland as a piece of ancient wisdom about spirituality, higher consciousness, or even human enlightenment. Today, if you visit the Vatican and stand before that great bronze pine cone, you might see only a metal object, but behind it lies a long and layered history, a symbol shared across cultures, and a question that still remains unanswered. The small cap and the forgotten goddess. When entering a Catholic church, many people may notice that priests or cardinals often wear a small, round, and simple cap. This cap is called the zucchetto. For the Pope, it is typically white. For cardinals, it is deep red. To most, it appears as nothing more than a familiar part of religious attire. But few know that this seemingly ordinary object has a long and controversial history. The shape of the zucchetto can be traced back to ancient Rome, specifically to the rituals honoring a goddess named Cybele. She was regarded as the mother of the gods, symbolizing fertility, war, and divine protection. The priests who served Cybele, known as the Galli, wore unusual garments, performed extreme rituals, and most notably, wore a round cap on their heads. This cap was more than a sign of reverence. It symbolized the renunciation of personal identity in order to become a devoted servant of the goddess. When compared side by side, the cap worn by the Galli bears a striking resemblance to the zucchetto used by Catholic clergy today. And this raises an important question. Why would a symbol associated with the worship of an ancient goddess appear in a religion that emphasizes devotion to a single god? Some argue that this is merely a cultural remnant or perhaps a matter of practicality. But for those who study religious history and ancient symbols, the similarity is too significant to dismiss as coincidence. It's possible that as Christianity evolved, it absorbed certain symbolic elements from earlier belief systems. The use of the zucchetto may be part of that process, retaining something familiar to people during a period of transition, while imbuing it with new meaning. But there is also another possibility that ancient knowledge once existed, carried profound meaning, and for reasons unknown, was either hidden or transformed. The pointed hat and traces of the Babylonian fish god. If you've ever seen the Pope or Catholic bishops during major ceremonies, you've likely noticed the distinctive hat they wear. Tall, pointed, and split at the top, it is known as the mitre. This hat is a significant part of the vestments worn by high-ranking clergy and is typically seen during solemn rituals. Yet few people realize that the shape of the mitre can be traced back thousands of years to a religion entirely different from Christianity. The mitre closely resembles the headgear once worn by ancient Babylonian priests during worship of the god Dagon. In surviving stone reliefs, Dagon is often depicted as a half-human, half-fish entity, or as a man draped in a fish's skin, covering him from head to toe. His priests wore a hat shaped like the head of a fish with its mouth open atop the wearer's head, while the rest of the fish's body flowed down the back like a cloak. If you look closely, the open fish mouth atop the priest's head looks almost identical to the mitre worn by the Pope today. Dagon was no obscure deity. He was worshipped by the Babylonians, Assyrians, and Philistines from early antiquity. In many traditions, he was the god of agriculture and fertility, revered as a giver of life, bringing forth both abundant crops and dominion over the sea. In the agricultural and fishing societies of the ancient world, a god like this held immense importance. Notably, Dagon is also mentioned in the Bible. In 1 Samuel chapter 5, the Philistines capture the Ark of the Covenant and place it in the temple of Dagon. But soon after, the statue of Dagon falls face down to the ground, twice, as a sign that the power of the Hebrew god surpasses all. This story highlights that Dagon was not a figure encouraged for worship in Jewish tradition or in the Christian faith that followed. So why does the headpiece of Dagon's ancient priests appear in modern Catholic ritual? Some scholars suggest it may be the result of cultural transition. As Christianity spread throughout the Roman Empire and surrounding territories, it adopted certain symbols that were familiar to the local populations, easing their acceptance of the new faith. Symbols like the mitre may have been retained but given a new meaning, one aligned with Christian doctrine. Still, others raise deeper questions. Are these symbols merely cultural conveniences, or do they point to something more hidden? Could it be that remnants of ancient belief systems remain embedded in modern rituals, and that they were never truly erased? Easter and the memory of a forgotten spring goddess. For many, Easter is a time to commemorate the resurrection of Jesus Christ after 3 days on the cross. It is one of the most sacred holidays in Catholicism and has been observed for centuries. But alongside its religious meaning, Easter today is also marked by familiar symbols: colorful eggs, rabbits, gift baskets, sweets, and joyful egg hunts for children. How did a story of sacrifice and resurrection become entwined with bunnies and eggs? The answer lies deeper in history, far earlier than the arrival of Christianity. Symbols like eggs and rabbits have long represented new life, fertility, and the rebirth of nature after the long, cold winter. Specifically, they are associated with the goddess Eostre, a spring deity worshipped by the ancient Anglo-Saxons. According to legend, Eostre was the goddess of light, blossoms, and harvest. It was believed that each year, around April, she returned to awaken life in the soil, the trees, and all living things. People held festivals in her honor, with rituals centered around eggs and hares. The English word Easter is also thought to derive from her name. An English monk from the 8th century, Bede, recorded that the Anglo-Saxons once celebrated a festival called Eosterminath to mark the coming of spring. When Christianity spread, the church retained the name while replacing the festival's content with the story of Christ's resurrection. It wasn't just the name. The timing of Easter also reflects traces of ancient ritual. Easter does not fall on a fixed date each year, but is celebrated on the first Sunday after the full moon following the spring equinox. This method of calculation relies entirely on lunar and solar cycles, an approach rooted in pre-Christian cultures for determining festivals, planting seasons, and fertility rites. In this way, the Easter we know today is a fusion of Christian faith and ancient custom. As Christianity spread across Europe, the Church didn't entirely erase pagan traditions. Instead, it wove them into the new religious narrative. This made it easier for people to convert, while still preserving elements of the seasonal festivals they had known all their lives. So, the Easter egg is not merely a playful game for children. It was once a symbol of the universe, of life renewing itself from the beginning. And the rabbit was once a sacred reminder of spring's return, the earth stirring back to life after a season of stillness. The peacock and what remains unspoken. In the court of the pine cone at the Vatican, beside the massive bronze pine cone sculpture, stand 2 peacocks, one on each side. Countless visitors take photos here, yet few realize that these peacocks are not merely decorative. They carry a deeper meaning, rooted in various cultures and continuing to provoke thought even today. In Christian tradition, the peacock was once regarded as a symbol of eternal life and resurrection. It was believed that the flesh of a peacock did not decay after death. Though modern science has disproven this notion, the belief persisted for centuries, enough to elevate the peacock into a powerful image of triumph over death. In many ancient churches, one can still find paintings or stained glass windows depicting peacocks alongside crosses or angels. But the peacock's presence is not exclusive to Christianity. In Islamic mythology, it is seen as the guardian of paradise, a sacred creature tasked with protecting the eternal realm. At the same time, the peacock is also portrayed as the one who led Satan into the Garden of Eden to tempt Eve, a cautionary image of beauty's dual nature, its allure and its danger. In Greek mythology, the peacock is associated with the goddess Hera. She gifted the bird its radiant feathers, each marked with eyes, after the death of the giant Argus. Since then, the peacock became a symbol of all-seeing awareness and divine perception. In Egyptian culture, the peacock is connected with the sun and rebirth, as its luminous plumage resembles the brilliance of sunlight. Meanwhile, in Hinduism, the peacock is sacred to Saraswati, the goddess of wisdom and truth. Yet it also symbolizes unstable emotions and the inner transformations one must undergo to reach higher understanding. Another curious detail is that the peacock eats venomous snakes. This fact is rarely mentioned, yet it carries powerful symbolism. In many schools of thought, snakes represent lower instincts, desire, anger, envy. When the peacock consumes the serpent, the act is interpreted as a victory of spirit over vice, the journey of overcoming one's darker impulses to attain inner peace and elevated consciousness. So, when standing in the court of the pine cone, gazing at the two symmetrical peacocks flanking the bronze sculpture, you are not merely witnessing ancient art. You are standing before a silent message, a reminder that life is not just of the body, but of the transformation of the mind. That beauty lies not only in vibrant color, but in the power to overcome the shadow within each of us. The god Janus and the secret behind New Year's Day. January 1st is the day the world celebrates the start of a new year. People gather, exchange well wishes, and set fresh intentions. To most, it is simply the first day of the Gregorian calendar. But few realize that this particular date holds a deeper significance, one that traces back to an ancient Roman deity named Janus. Janus is one of the oldest and most distinctive gods in Roman mythology. He is depicted with two faces, one looking to the past, the other gazing into the future. He has no direct counterpart in Greek mythology. In Roman culture, Janus was the god of transitions, between old and new, outside and inside, ending and beginning. The name of the month January is derived from Janus. This is not a coincidence. The Romans chose this month to honor his role, believing that whenever people entered a new phase of life, they needed a guide, and Janus was the one who could open the way. In ancient times, the Romans held special ceremonies at the start of the year to ask Janus to unlock favorable paths for the future. They would offer keys as symbols of his power to open doors. They also stepped through their front entrances with care, hoping to leave misfortune behind and welcome blessings into their homes. This simple act carried a powerful belief that a good beginning would shape the course of the entire year. Though most of those rituals are no longer widely practiced, the influence of Janus remains. When we reflect on the past year, consider what has happened, and set goals for the year ahead, we are, in our own way, continuing an ancient tradition. Even within the Catholic Church, January 1st is marked by a solemn Mass. It is known as the Day of Prayer for World Peace. Yet, if one looks closely, it too can be seen as a quiet echo of the old, a bridge between ancient faith and modern worship, from folklore to sacred rite. And so, each year when the clock strikes midnight, when fireworks light up the sky, when you raise a glass with friends and family, you may unknowingly be partaking in a ritual that began thousands of years ago. A ritual once dedicated to the god Janus, the gatekeeper of time, the protector of all beginnings. The solar wheel and the memory of the god Baal. If you've ever stood in the center of St. Peter's Square at the Vatican, you may have noticed a large stone circle embedded in the ground beneath the Egyptian obelisk. Many people walk across it without a second glance, but if you look closely, you'll see that it is not an ordinary circle. It is divided into 8 spokes radiating outward from the center, resembling a shining sun. This is the solar wheel. The solar wheel is one of the oldest symbols known to humanity. In many ancient cultures, the sun was revered as the source of life, the center of existence. The image of an 8-spoked wheel appears across civilizations, from Mesopotamian and Egyptian temples to stone carvings throughout Europe. But its presence at the heart of the Vatican raises a thought-provoking question. Some researchers believe that the 8-spoked wheel in St. Peter's Square may represent the Wheel of Baal, the god of rain, fertility, and thunder, worshipped by the Canaanites and Phoenicians. Baal was once one of the most important deities in the ancient Near East. Honored as the giver of life to the earth and its harvests, rituals dedicated to him were deeply tied to the cycles of nature: rain, sun, planting, and reaping. The sun symbol became a visual representation of his divine power. Alongside the large 8-spoked wheel, the square also contains a smaller 4-spoked wheel, and, of course, the obelisk at the center. When these three elements are combined, the obelisk, the 8-spoked wheel, and the 4-spoked wheel, they form a system of symbols layered with meaning. Together, they represent solar energy, masculine vitality, and the unending rhythm of the cosmos. In ancient pagan rites, the sun was not merely a celestial body. It was seen as a divine presence, the spiritual core of all things. The solar wheel symbolized eternal motion, the cycle of seasons, and the unceasing pulse of life. But why would symbols once associated with Baal and pagan ritual appear in the heart of what is now the highest seat of the Christian faith? The answer may again lie in how early Catholicism approached indigenous cultures. By preserving symbols familiar to ancient peoples, the Church made it easier for them to embrace the new faith. The solar wheel could have been reinterpreted, from a symbol of Baal's power to one of God's divine light, from the sun's cycle to a wheel of grace. But others offer a different perspective. They argue that these symbols never truly lost their original meaning, that instead they were cloaked in new interpretations. According to this view, the enduring presence of pagan iconography at the heart of the Vatican is no accident, but quiet evidence that something from the past still lingers unspoken in the present. The hexagram and questions without answers. In the world of religious symbolism, few images spark as much controversy as the 6-pointed star, also known as the hexagram. For many today, this symbol is recognized as the Star of David, closely tied to Judaism and Jewish identity. But the history of the hexagram is far longer and more complex than commonly told. The hexagram consists of 2 interlocking triangles forming 6 evenly spaced points. It is not a modern invention, but an ancient symbol that appeared in the cultures of Egypt, Babylon, and ancient India. For centuries, the hexagram was used in ceremonial magic, astrology, and mystical rites. It was once seen as a symbol of balance between heaven and earth, male and female, spirit and matter. One modern organization that continues to use the hexagram is the Theosophical Society, a mystical movement founded in the late 19th century that blends Western philosophy with Eastern religion. Its emblem includes the hexagram, a coiled serpent, a swastika, and other esoteric images. The Society's founders, including Helena Blavatsky, openly praised Lucifer as a symbol of enlightened knowledge, further fueling public suspicion about their true intentions. What surprises many is that the hexagram can also be found within the Vatican, appearing in floor mosaics, architectural details, and even on ceremonial headpieces worn by some popes in history. For a symbol once used in non-Christian rituals and even linked to practices deemed heretical, its presence at the heart of the Catholic Church has raised more than a few eyebrows. Some argue that this is merely a geometric coincidence, that the hexagram is simply a classical, balanced design. Others believe the symbol retains its sacred energy, even if its meaning has evolved. But there are also those who take a harder stance, claiming that the existence of the hexagram within holy spaces suggests that mystical currents and non-Christian influences still quietly persist within the Church. To this day, the Vatican has offered no official explanation for the presence of hexagrams within its grounds. And like many other symbols preserved from antiquity, the hexagram remains part of a larger picture where history, belief, and unspoken meanings coexist. For some, it may be nothing more than a 6-pointed design, but for those who study the history of religion and ancient symbolic systems, the hexagram remains a question without an answer. When Saturnalia wore the garments of Christmas. Before Christianity became the official religion of the Roman Empire, the Romans already celebrated a major festival in late December. This festival was called Saturnalia, and it was held in honor of the god Saturn, the deity of agriculture. It took place between December 17th and 23rd, in the heart of winter, just as the shortest day of the year approached. Saturnalia was unlike any other holiday. During this time, social roles were reversed. Slaves dined with their masters, the poor were allowed to speak freely, and people were encouraged to let go of daily rules and expectations. A spirit of revelry swept through the streets of Rome. Citizens exchanged gifts, wore colorful clothing, feasted abundantly, and decorated evergreen trees in the hope that spring would return. Alongside Saturnalia, the Romans also celebrated another festival known as Dies Natalis Solis Invicti, the birth of the unconquered sun. This took place on December 25th, just after the winter solstice, when the sun began to grow stronger each day. To the Romans, it symbolized light overcoming darkness, life returning after months of cold and gloom. As Christianity spread, the church faced the reality that deeply rooted folk celebrations could not be erased entirely. Rather than resist, the church chose to transform. And so, December 25th was designated as the birth date of Christ, not because of any definitive evidence about the actual date of his birth, but because it was already a time when people were accustomed to celebrating something significant. Over time, elements of Saturnalia and other pagan festivals blended into the celebration of Christmas. The image of the evergreen tree, once used to ward off evil spirits in ancient rites, became a symbol of eternal life. The tradition of gift-giving, once a gesture of temporary equality across social classes, evolved into an expression of love and goodwill. And the festive atmosphere of singing, feasting, and lights still echoes the spirit of those ancient winter days. When Christian art still bore the colors of ancient myth, many believe that Christian art emerged suddenly and definitively, as if one day the images of ancient gods vanished and were replaced entirely by crosses, saints, and angels. But the reality was far more gradual. Like the faith itself, Christian art underwent a slow formation, step by step separating from what came before. And one of the clearest traces of that transition lies deep beneath the city of Rome, in a site known as the Tomb of the Aureli family. The tomb was discovered in 1919, but it wasn't until 2012 that restoration experts completed the cleaning and full preservation of its artwork. It dates back to the 3rd century AD, a time when Christianity was still a minority faith, persecuted and forced to operate in secrecy. And yet, the influence of Christianity had begun to seep into Roman life and thought. The art reflects this change. Inside the tomb, vivid frescoes cover the walls, images that cause viewers to pause and wonder. A woman is seen standing atop a serpent, perhaps an allusion to Eve in the Garden of Eden, or possibly an ancient goddess triumphing over darkness. A man forms small human figures, possibly symbolizing God creating mankind, but also reminiscent of Prometheus in Greek mythology. There are also scenes of sages, strange animals, idyllic landscapes, and a host of symbols not easily categorized as belonging to any single mythology. This blending reveals a period of transition, when Romans had not yet fully let go of their old beliefs, but had already begun to accept something new. The artists behind these works seem to be searching for a way to unite two worlds, introducing Christian ideas into a visual language they already knew. There is no depiction of the cross or of Jesus in the classical form we now associate with Christian art, and that is precisely what makes the Tomb of the Aureli so remarkable. It is not purely Christian art, but neither is it entirely pagan. This site also illustrates how the early church built its faith atop the foundation of what had come before. The ideas, imagery, and even storytelling methods were inherited and gradually transformed, and art is where that process is most clearly recorded. The fallen angels and the origins of evil. In the history of religion, there are stories that never made it into the official Bible. One of them can be found in an ancient text known as the Book of Watchers. This book was written around 250 years before the birth of Jesus Christ. It was once widely read in certain early religious communities, but was later banned and excluded by the Vatican. Many believe this was because its contents were too divergent, possibly revealing truths the church did not want made public. The book tells a strange and unsettling tale of angels who descended from heaven. They were known as the Watchers, beings assigned to observe humanity. But according to the text, some of these angels failed in their duty. They did not fall because they fought against God, but because they became curious, enticed by the human world. One of these angels was named Asael. He taught women how to use cosmetics to enhance their beauty. He also taught men how to forge weapons and craft ornaments from metal. Today, such knowledge may seem ordinary, but at the time it was considered forbidden, knowledge that could lead to lust, violence, and greed. Another angel, Shemahaza, went even further. He persuaded the other angels to take human women as wives. They did, and from these unions came a hybrid race, half angel, half human, known as the Nephilim. These were beings of immense size and strength, but they were also savage. According to the book, the Nephilim ravaged humanity, devoured people, and brought destruction to the world. Things became so dire that God could no longer ignore the chaos. As the Book of Watchers tells it, the Great Flood was sent specifically to erase the damage caused by the fallen angels and their offspring. But the spirits of these beings did not vanish. Because they were not fully human, they could not ascend to heaven. And because they were not demons, they could not descend to hell. Instead, they remained, wandering the earth, seeking to corrupt humanity even further. Some scholars believe these Nephilim spirits may be an ancient explanation for what we now call evil spirits, those unseen forces that lure people toward greed, rage, and deception. So why was this story banned by the Vatican? Perhaps because it suggests that the origin of sin does not lie solely with humans, but also with celestial beings, angels once considered perfect. This contradicts the official narrative of the Bible, which portrays a world where all evil begins with man. And if the Book of Watchers is true, then are we wrong about where evil really comes from? The debauchery of the Borgia popes. In the 15th and 16th centuries, the Vatican fell under the influence of one of the most controversial families in the history of the Catholic Church, the Borgia dynasty. Originally from Spain, the Borgias quickly consolidated power in Italy through political cunning, financial maneuvering, and personal alliances. Though only 2 popes emerged from the Borgia line, their impact on the Vatican during that era was immense. The first was Pope Calixtus III, born Alphonse de Borja. He ascended to the papacy in 1455 at an advanced age and reigned for just 3 years before his death. During that brief tenure, he made several notable decisions, including the posthumous rehabilitation of Joan of Arc, the French heroine who had been condemned as a heretic and burned at the stake in 1431. Calixtus III also ensured the elevation of his relatives, appointing several family members as cardinals to safeguard the Borgia influence after his death. His successor within the family was his nephew, Rodrigo Borgia, later known as Pope Alexander VI. Rodrigo had already attracted scandal long before he wore the papal crown. He fathered numerous illegitimate children and lived an openly lavish lifestyle. Despite this, he was elected pope in 1492. Upon becoming pontiff, Alexander VI ushered in a reign defined by corruption, excess, and decadence. He was accused of selling church offices. Those with wealth were made cardinals, regardless of virtue or piety. One of the most infamous episodes of his papacy was the banquet held on October 31st, 1501, known as the Banquet of Chestnuts. This event took place inside the papal palace in Rome and was attended by high-ranking clergy and approximately 50 prostitutes brought in to entertain the guests. Eyewitnesses described a night of unchecked indulgence, overflowing with wine, lust, and conduct unimaginable in what was meant to be the heart of Christian faith. The moral collapse during the reign of Alexander VI deeply tarnished the Vatican's reputation. Though he died of malaria in 1503, what he left behind became a permanent stain on church history. The Borgia family not only weakened the spiritual trust of the faithful, they marked an era where religious power was manipulated by personal gain, compromise, and depravity. To this day, the name Borgia remains a symbol of one of the darkest chapters in the Vatican's past. The Vatican Gifts, a relic of the true cross. In May 2023, as King Charles III walked into Westminster Abbey for his coronation, he followed behind a very special cross. This was no ordinary Christian symbol. According to an official statement from the Vatican, it contained 2 fragments of the true cross, the very cross upon which Jesus Christ was crucified. The gift was personally bestowed by Pope Francis to the United Kingdom as a symbol of faith and unity between 2 nations. But the sacred gift quickly stirred questions that remain unanswered. How could the Vatican possibly possess so many fragments of the true cross that it could afford to give them away like relics of goodwill? And if this was truly a part of the original cross, how could such a claim ever be verified? According to tradition, the true cross was discovered in the 4th century AD by Helena, the mother of Roman Emperor Constantine. During her pilgrimage to Jerusalem, she reportedly uncovered 3 wooden crosses, one of which was believed to be the very instrument of Christ's crucifixion. Over the centuries, the relic was broken into smaller and smaller pieces, distributed among the great churches of Europe. With time, the number of alleged fragments multiplied so dramatically that some have joked, if you gathered them all in one place, you could build an entire ship. not everyone accepts the authenticity of these sacred splinters. In 2016, researchers at Oxford University tested a piece of the True Cross kept at Waterford Cathedral in Ireland. Their findings dated the wood to the 12th century, over 1,100 years after the time of Jesus. Still, that hasn't stopped churches around the world from venerating these relics as sacred artifacts. One lesser-known episode occurred in 2022 during the height of the war between Russia and Ukraine. According to a Russian Orthodox priest, a piece of the True Cross was placed aboard the guided missile cruiser Moskva, the flagship of Russia's Black Sea Fleet. When the ship was struck by Ukrainian missiles and sank into the depths of the Black Sea, the relic went down with it. No one knows whether it was a genuine piece of the original cross, but the story only adds to the mystery surrounding these venerated fragments. Whatever the truth may be, the fact that the Vatican still possesses and gifts wooden pieces believed to be the most sacred object in all of Christianity raises important questions. Is this truly a meaningful act of faith? Or is it part of a long-standing tradition of religious symbolism passed down through centuries? The Vatican and the American Civil War. During the American Civil War, there was an event rarely mentioned in history textbooks, yet it caused a diplomatic shockwave at the time. Pope Pius IX recognized Jefferson Davis as the President of the Confederate States of America, a move that outraged the U.S. government and cast a long shadow over relations for more than a century. It began in 1863 when President Jefferson Davis, the leader of the Southern Confederacy, wrote a letter to Pope Pius IX expressing gratitude for the Pope's prayers for peace. What stunned many was the Vatican's reply. In his response, Pope Pius IX referred to Jefferson Davis as President of the Confederate States of America, a form of address that carried clear political implications. Though the Vatican never issued a formal declaration recognizing the South as an independent nation, the language used was widely interpreted as a quiet endorsement of the secessionist cause. The reaction from the United States was severe. Under the leadership of President Abraham Lincoln, the federal government saw the Pope's words as an unacceptable foreign intrusion into domestic affairs. That a major religious power such as the Vatican appeared to side with a faction defending slavery only deepened national divisions. In the years that followed, diplomatic relations between the U.S. and the Holy See grew increasingly strained. By 1867, Congress passed a law cutting off all official ties with the Vatican, a break that would remain in effect until the 1980s. But the story didn't end there. After the war concluded and Abraham Lincoln was assassinated, rumors began to swirl that the Pope's support for the Confederacy might have indirectly encouraged extremist actions. Some historians have noted that several individuals involved in the assassination plot were Catholic, and they speculate that Pope Pius IX's position could have influenced their thinking. While no official evidence has ever linked the Vatican to Lincoln's murder, the mere suggestion has left an enduring shadow in the minds of many. Adding to the mystery are several lesser-known details. After the war, when Jefferson Davis was imprisoned, Pope Pius IX sent him a portrait of himself, along with a written prayer. According to some accounts, the Pope also gifted Davis a crown of thorns, a symbol of Christ's suffering. Though this latter claim has never been officially confirmed, the gesture of sending any gift at all was enough to show that the Vatican had not turned its back on the defeated leader of the South. To many, this episode serves as evidence that the Vatican once stood on the wrong side of history, not just in the American Civil War, but in other politically sensitive moments around the world. Whether that judgment is fair or not, the incident left a long, uneasy silence between a modern superpower and one of the oldest religious institutions on Earth. The treasure of King Solomon. In the Bible, King Solomon is portrayed as one of the most powerful and wealthy rulers to have ever lived. He was the son of King David and reigned over the kingdom of Israel around the 10th century BCE. But what people remember most about Solomon is not just his wisdom, it is his seemingly unimaginable wealth. Some modern estimates suggest that, converted into today's value, Solomon's fortune could have exceeded 2.1 trillion, far beyond any billionaire of the modern age. According to the Bible, each year Solomon received vast quantities of gold, silver, ivory, and precious goods from other nations. He used this immense wealth to build the first temple in Jerusalem, a sacred site said to have once housed the Ark of the Covenant. It was considered one of the most magnificent religious structures of the ancient world. Yet for centuries, archaeological evidence has remained elusive, insufficient to fully confirm these descriptions as historical fact. Some scholars have argued that the Bible exaggerated Solomon's power and riches. But in recent years, new archaeological discoveries have reignited the question: Could Solomon have truly been an ancient merchant king? One of the leading theories is that Solomon established long-standing trade relations with the Phoenicians, an ancient seafaring civilization known for their expansive commerce across the Mediterranean. According to some researchers, Solomon financed maritime expeditions that ventured across distant seas to gather minerals and valuable goods. Marine archaeologist Dr. Sean Kingsley believes these trade links were real. After years of research, he and his team have uncovered traces of ancient activity at coastal ports in Israel, Spain, and even Sardinia, places once connected to Phoenician trading networks. At the same time, another group of researchers has focused inland, specifically the Negev Desert in southern Israel. There, archaeologists have uncovered large-scale copper mines dating roughly to the era in which Solomon is believed to have ruled. Given the vast quantities of copper extracted from the region, some experts now believe these operations may have played a critical role in the economy of Solomon's kingdom. In the ancient world, copper was not just a valuable metal, it was essential for making tools, weapons, and decorative objects. If these mines truly date to Solomon's reign, they could point to a historical basis for the wealth described in the Bible. And if Solomon indeed pioneered both maritime trade routes and resource extraction on land, then he was not merely a figure of myth. He may have been one of the earliest commercial monarchs in human history. To this day, the actual treasure of Solomon has never been found, but the evidence is beginning to surface, slowly, piece by piece. Saint Christopher and the god Anubis. In Christian tradition, Saint Christopher is known as the patron saint of travelers, drivers, and pilgrims. But there is a detail often overlooked yet widely debated, that in certain medieval artworks, Saint Christopher is depicted with the body of a man but the head of a dog. This puzzling portrayal has led many to ask, why would a saint appear in such a strange form? What makes the mystery even more intriguing is that Saint Christopher's dog-headed appearance bears a striking resemblance to the Egyptian god Anubis. Anubis, the guardian of the dead and master of embalming rituals, was typically portrayed as a human figure with the head of a jackal. He was charged with protecting souls and preserving the purity of the afterlife. The visual similarity has inspired a number of theories. One suggests that it may have stemmed from a mistranslation in the distant past. If a single word was copied incorrectly in an early manuscript, it could have transformed the image of Christopher from an ordinary man into a dog-headed being in both artistic imagination and painted form. A second theory is rooted in ancient European legend. Roman and medieval texts describe distant tribes said to dwell on the fringes of the known world. People with human bodies and the heads of dogs. These creatures were known as cynocephali, or dog-headed men. In some stories, they were not demons, but simply strange beings living apart from the rest of humanity. Some scholars suggest that Saint Christopher may have originally been associated with this mythical group, and that over time, the Church reinterpreted him as a symbol of transformation, an outsider redeemed and sanctified through faith. And then there is the boldest theory of all. What if Saint Christopher was, in essence, a Christianized version of Anubis himself? The similarities in appearance and role are difficult to ignore. During the early centuries of Christianity's spread, the Church often absorbed pagan deities and mythologies, recasting them as saints to ease the transition for new converts. If this was the case, then the dog-headed image of Saint Christopher was not a mistake or misunderstanding, but a lingering echo of an older, deeper cultural layer. Today, most modern depictions of Saint Christopher show him as a strong man carrying the child Jesus across a river. But in the past, dog-headed versions of the saint could still be found in churches, illuminated manuscripts, and murals, especially throughout medieval Europe. The Incorrupt Nun. In 2019, at a small monastery in the state of Missouri, Sister Wilhelmina Lancaster passed away at the age of 95. She was the founder of the Benedictine Sisters of Mary, a traditional religious community known for its strict adherence to discipline, prayer, and faith. After her death, her body was laid to rest in a simple wooden coffin. It was not embalmed, no preservatives were used, and there was no refrigeration system. Everything was carried out modestly, in keeping with the humble life she had lived. 4 years later, in May 2023, the sisters at the monastery decided to relocate her remains into the chapel on the monastery grounds. When they opened the coffin, they were stunned. Wilhelmina Lancaster's body was mysteriously intact. Her skin retained its elasticity, her face showed no signs of distortion, and even her clothing remained unspoiled. Those present could hardly believe their eyes. Under natural conditions, with high humidity and a cracked coffin, the body should have fully decomposed. Yet what lay before them was a body that appeared almost unchanged after 4 years underground. News of the phenomenon spread quickly. thousands of people traveled to the monastery to witness the scene and pray beside her remains. Many believed it was a true miracle, a sign of the holiness in Sister Wilhelmina Lancaster's life. Some faithful even began referring to her as America's first incorrupt nun, a term used in Catholic tradition to describe individuals whose bodies do not decay after death, believed by some to be a mark of divine favor. However, the Vatican has not yet recognized this as a miracle, nor has it made any official move to consider Wilhelmina for sainthood. Many hope that an investigation will begin soon, but for now, everything remains under review. Meanwhile, some scientists have offered more grounded explanations. Dr. Nicholas Pasalacqua, a forensic expert, noted that the human body can take up to 5 years or more to decompose, depending on environmental conditions, humidity, and microbial activity. While he acknowledged the unusual state of preservation, he maintained that there may still be a scientific explanation. Even so, the extraordinary preservation of Wilhelmina Lancaster's body left a powerful impression on those who saw it. For many, especially devout Catholics, it was more than coincidence. It was a sign of faith made visible. Today, Sister Wilhelmina's body rests in a glass coffin inside the monastery's chapel, where the public continues to visit and pay their respects. Whether it is a miracle or a natural phenomenon, her story has stirred both renewed belief and questions that remain unanswered. Mafia, the Vatican Bank, and Archbishop Paul Marcinkus. In the 1970s and 1980s, the Vatican was not only the spiritual center of the Catholic world, it also became the epicenter of one of the biggest financial scandals of the century. At the heart of the storm was a man named Paul Marcinkus, an American archbishop who ran the Vatican Bank for nearly 2 decades. Marcinkus was once a trusted figure within the church. He led the Istituto per le Opere di Religione, better known as the Vatican Bank, from 1971 to 1989. But under his leadership, the bank didn't just process religious transactions. It became entangled in a web of complex financial operations, including money laundering and shady investments. Suspicions of ties between the Vatican Bank and the Italian mafia began to emerge when investigators uncovered large sums of money funneled through shell companies and untraceable offshore accounts. The scandal reached its peak in the early 1980s, when the Vatican Bank was implicated in the collapse of Banco Ambrosiano, then one of Italy's largest private financial institutions. The Vatican, a minority shareholder in Ambrosiano, was accused of backing secret loans totaling over $1.3 billion through phantom corporations allegedly linked to both Marcinkus and figures from the criminal underworld. As law enforcement and financial authorities expanded their investigation, they sought to question Marcinkus. But the Vatican refused to cooperate, citing diplomatic immunity for high-ranking officials. As a Vatican citizen and a member of the Holy See's governing body, Paul Marcinkus could not be prosecuted under Italian law. Even when U.S. authorities expressed interest in investigating suspicious transactions tied to international markets, Marcinkus never appeared in court. For the remainder of his life, Paul Marcinkus lived quietly in a small town in Arizona. He rarely spoke publicly about the scandal, and until his death in 2006, he was never formally charged with any crime. Yet his name remains forever linked to one of the darkest chapters in the financial history of the Vatican. The story of Marcinkus is not just about a financial scandal. It is a stark reminder that even within the walls of a sacred religious institution, hidden doors may conceal dangerous alliances and truths too uncomfortable to face. King David, legend or history? In the Bible, King David is one of the most frequently mentioned figures. He is the young shepherd who defeated Goliath, the successor to King Saul, and the ruler said to have governed a powerful kingdom with its capital in Jerusalem. But did David truly exist? And if he did, was he really the leader of a great empire as described in Scripture? For centuries, the absence of clear archaeological evidence led many to doubt that King David was anything more than a myth, a legendary figure invented to legitimize a later ruling dynasty. But a critical discovery in 1993 began to shift that perception. At an archaeological site in northern Israel known as Tel Dan, researchers uncovered a stone fragment inscribed with the phrase "House of David." This was the first and most important extra-biblical reference to David, confirmation not from within the Hebrew tradition, but from an enemy's records. A victorious Aramean king had engraved on his victory stele that he had defeated the king of Israel and the king of the house of David. This find marked a turning point in the field of biblical archaeology. Though the stone fragment was small, it proved that the name David had real historical presence in the ancient Near East. It was not simply a literary invention. Since then, other excavations have been launched to investigate the true scale of David's kingdom. One of the leading figures in this research is Professor Yosef Garfinkel of the Hebrew University of Jerusalem. Over the course of many years, he and his team uncovered a network of fortified cities surrounding the region of Judea, all dating to the same era, the 10th century BCE, precisely the time when David is believed to have reigned. According to Professor Garfinkel, if these cities were built simultaneously, share similar structures, and are linked by an organized road system, then it is likely they were part of a centralized government. And if that were the case, the man who led that kingdom would have been none other than King David. However, not everyone agrees with this conclusion. Some scholars argue that the cities are still too small to suggest an empire. They believe David may have been a local tribal chieftain ruling over a modest area around Jerusalem, and that his grandeur was embellished by later biblical editors. While the debate remains unsettled, recent archaeological findings have increasingly pointed to the likelihood that King David was not just a figure of myth. He was a real person, possibly one with far more power and historical significance than the academic world had once imagined. The Vatican's role in the Rwandan genocide. In 1994, the African nation of Rwanda descended into a period of unimaginable bloodshed. Within just 3 months, an estimated 800,000 people, most of them from the Tutsi ethnic group, were brutally killed in what the world would later call genocide. What makes this tragedy even more unsettling is the special role the Catholic Church played during that time. With a vast number of followers and deep-rooted influence in local communities, the church was an integral part of Rwanda's social and spiritual life. But instead of serving as sanctuaries, some Catholic churches in Rwanda became the sites of the most horrific massacres. Many civilians fled to churches seeking protection. They believed these were sacred places and that priests would help shield them from the violence. But not everyone was saved. Some priests were accused not only of indifference, but of directly contributing to the deaths of thousands. One of the most cited cases was that of Father Athanas Seromba. He was the priest in charge of a church where around 2,000 Tutsis had sought refuge. According to witness testimony and official investigations, Seromba allowed the entire church to be destroyed, while the people were still inside. He was later arrested and tried by the International Criminal Tribunal for crimes against humanity. But the story didn't end there. When the Rwandan government requested the extradition of other priests believed to be involved in the genocide, the Vatican refused. Instead, several of these individuals were relocated to other countries in Europe, given new identities, and allowed to continue their religious duties as if nothing had happened. Some were reassigned to ministry roles, quietly, without explanation. The Vatican's refusal to extradite these priests left many baffled. For a religious institution with global moral influence, the decision created a silence that remains difficult to explain. Some argue it was an effort to protect the church's reputation. Others believe it was an attempt to avoid public shame. Whatever the reason, it left a deep wound, not only in the hearts of many Rwandans, but also in those around the world who care about justice. This issue is not just about individual guilt or isolated trials. It raises a larger question of moral responsibility. What does it mean when a global religious institution chooses not to speak out or take action in the face of such overwhelming tragedy? The Vatican and the ivory trade. For years, the world has witnessed the alarming decline of the African elephant population. These gentle giants are often killed for one reason alone: the valuable ivory that grows from their heads. It is a tragic reality, not just for conservationists, but for anyone who cares about the survival of life on Earth. What many find surprising is the role of the Vatican in this story, not because the church is directly involved in elephant hunting, but because ivory has long been used in the creation of religious objects: crucifixes, saintly statues, and various decorations found in churches. These items appear during sacred rituals, in holy spaces, and at times even in religious souvenir shops. While many countries and international organizations have signed agreements to protect endangered species, the Vatican has not joined CITES, the Convention on International Trade in Endangered Species, established in 1989 to curb the trade in ivory and other products from threatened animals. By not participating, the Vatican is under no obligation to follow the same restrictions on ivory use and sale that apply to other nations. Animal rights advocates have repeatedly raised their voices, urging the Vatican to abandon the use of ivory in religious artifacts and to seek alternative materials. They argue that an institution which preaches compassion and the sanctity of life should lead by example, especially when the objects in question are themselves symbols of sacred meaning. Yet, to this day, the Vatican has made no clear move to end its use of ivory, nor has it issued any public statement on the matter. The tradition of crafting religious icons and ceremonial objects from ivory continues in certain countries with workshops that have long-standing ties to the Church. While many communities around the world are striving to change in order to preserve the natural balance of life, the silence from an institution as globally influential as the Vatican has sparked considerable debate. Age of consent in Vatican City. Before 2013, the Vatican upheld a legal standard that many found difficult to comprehend. The age of consent for sexual relations was set at just 12 years old. This number was highly controversial, not only because it was significantly lower than the modern standard in most countries around the world, but also because it remained unchanged for decades without amendment or serious debate. With its tiny geographic size and a population made up almost entirely of clergy, Vatican employees, and security personnel, the Holy See is rarely a place where public discourse about legal systems or human rights takes center stage. Yet in the context of growing revelations surrounding sexual abuse scandals within the Catholic Church, the preservation of such a legal standard raised serious questions about the moral awareness and institutional responsibility of the world's most powerful religious body. The age of consent is defined as the age at which a person can legally engage in sexual activity with informed consent without it being considered statutory abuse. In most developed nations, this age typically ranges from 16 to 18. The fact that the Vatican kept it at 12, even if only as a technicality rarely applied in practice, was troubling to many international observers, especially given the Church's long-standing emphasis on protecting morality, children, and societal purity. It wasn't until 2013, after mounting external pressure and a wave of investigations into the abuse of minors by clergy, that Pope Francis signed a new law raising the age of consent to 18. The move was seen as both necessary and appropriate, but for many, it came far too late. This change did not erase what had already occurred, nor could it instantly restore the trust that had been eroded among Catholics around the world. But at the very least, it marked an acknowledgement that law must reflect not only legal standards, but moral values, human rights, and the duty to protect the most vulnerable. Nazi gold and the Vatican Bank. After World War II, as documents surfaced, testimonies were collected, and long-running investigations unfolded, certain secrets began to emerge. Among them was the troubling claim that the Vatican Bank had been involved in storing and transferring gold looted by the Croatian fascist regime. The story began in 1946, when an agent from the U.S. Treasury Department issued an internal memorandum. In it, he alleged that a large quantity of gold had been brought from Europe into the Vatican, not for charitable or religious purposes, but to assist former members of the Ustasha, the fascist regime that ruled Croatia during the war, in escaping prosecution. According to the memo, the gold had been stolen from Jews, Serbs, Romani, and other minority communities during the Ustasha's reign of terror. A portion of it was allegedly transferred to the Vatican Bank and then used to fund escape routes leading to South America or Spain, places where many former fascists would live out the rest of their lives without ever facing justice. Years later, in 1997, the Gowan Memorandum resurfaced, this time in the context of a class action lawsuit filed in the United States by victims and their descendants. They demanded the return of property taken from their families during the war and alleged the Vatican's involvement in its concealment. But the case went nowhere. The court dismissed it, citing the Vatican's immunity from civil lawsuits in the United States. This remains a difficult topic, one that raises questions not only about history, but about ethics. If the allegations are true, then the Vatican may have been complicit in the silent movement of stolen assets during one of the darkest chapters in human history. To this day, the Vatican has not formally acknowledged any responsibility related to the gold, and the full records surrounding the matter remain unreleased. But for many, the issue is not about receiving an apology. It's about transparency, about understanding what truly happened, and finally closing a chapter of history that, for far too long, has remained unresolved. Prostitution rings and hidden secrets inside the Vatican. In 2010, a police arrest in Italy unexpectedly exposed a web of highly sensitive connections. Angelo Balducci, a man with long-standing ties to the Vatican and a former high-ranking official in the Italian government, was arrested for his involvement in a male prostitution ring that reportedly served senior members of the clergy. Police investigations revealed that the network had been operating covertly for an extended period and included individuals who had once been trusted by the Vatican. The scandal quickly escalated, not only because of its explicit nature, but because it directly struck at the public image of the Catholic Church. Wiretapped phone calls were made public, exposing conversations that detailed a level of organization and entanglement far more intricate than the public had ever imagined. Then, in 2013, an internal report commissioned by the Vatican reignited a storm of suspicion and controversy. The report, believed to be the result of a confidential investigation within the Church, alleged that a number of cardinals and high-ranking officials had engaged in same-sex relationships and had been blackmailed by those who knew their secrets. The documents were never officially released, but multiple sources have claimed that the findings contributed to the shocking resignation of Pope Benedict XVI later that same year, a rare occurrence in the modern history of the Church. Although the Vatican has never publicly confirmed these reports, such revelations are no longer unfamiliar. Many inside and outside the Church have expressed concern, not only over individual misconduct, but over the vulnerability of a global institution to internal compromise. This is not merely a story of personal morality. It raises deeper questions about transparency and the Church's ability to police itself. A Church that holds spiritual authority over millions of lives. No matter how difficult the truth may be to face, trust can only endure when it is built on honesty. The Vatican and its quiet ties to the Italian mafia. For decades, the Church maintained silence regarding the existence and influence of mafia groups, at times even refusing to acknowledge that these criminal organizations existed at all. In 1964, a high-ranking cardinal declared that the mafia is merely a product of the imagination of those who oppose the Church. The statement was not only shocking, it also revealed a kind of evasiveness that many believed to be intentional. Later evidence, however, showed that the relationship between certain Church members and mafia groups was not merely one of denial. In some cases, mafia organizations were found to have financed religious activities, donated money to build churches, or provided financial support for major local church events. These contributions were often accepted under the label of benevolent donors, with little scrutiny over the origin of the funds. One of the most controversial examples occurred in the early 2000s, when a notorious mafia boss was buried inside a major church in Sicily, just steps away from where popes are traditionally laid to rest. His funeral was conducted with full religious honors, led by a priest and attended by hundreds of mourners. While there is no evidence that the Vatican directly authorized the event, the fact that such a ceremony was allowed to take place within the sacred walls of the Church left many bewildered. In recent years, some popes, most notably Pope Francis, have spoken out more forcefully against the violence and corruption perpetuated by criminal organizations. Yet the past remains, and the quiet relationships that once existed have never been fully explained. Leaks. When the Vatican's secrets were exposed. At the center of the leak was none other than Paolo Gabriele, the personal butler to Pope Benedict XVI. Gabriele was not a high-ranking official, nor was he an outsider. He lived inside Vatican City, worked beside the Pope daily, and had access to some of the most sensitive documents within the Holy See. For months, Gabriele secretly photocopied internal documents, ranging from letters and financial reports to personal notes exchanged between bishops and senior church officials. These materials were later passed to an Italian journalist and published in a bombshell book that revealed stories the Vatican never intended for the public eye. The leaked documents painted a picture far removed from the Vatican's polished public image: power struggles behind closed doors, financial scandals, mismanagement within key departments, and internal complaints about Pope Benedict's leadership. The revelations didn't just shake the faith of many Catholics, they triggered widespread doubts about the Church's true level of transparency. Once the leak was discovered, Gabriele was arrested and charged with theft of confidential documents. He admitted to his actions, but claimed he was motivated by a desire to open the Pope's eyes to what was happening around him. He believed that internal forces were deliberately keeping the truth from Benedict. Gabriele never took money for his actions and made no attempt to flee. After a formal trial, he was convicted, but Pope Benedict later pardoned him. Though Gabriele was the only individual officially brought to justice, many believe he did not act alone. There were strong suspicions of a wider group of clergy and Vatican insiders who, disillusioned by the state of internal governance, may have used Gabriele as a conduit to leak the truth. The Leaks scandal left a lasting impact. It proved that even within the most sacred and secretive institutions, human conflict, discontent, and power struggles persist, just as they do everywhere else. The Secret Files of Canon 489. Canon 489 is not a myth or rumor, it is a real archive, an official collection of documents preserved with utmost secrecy from the 18th century to the present day. Within it are detailed records of serious incidents involving crimes, misconduct, and the ways the Church chose to handle them. These files contain not only confessions from priests, but also internal correspondence, diocesan reports, and high-level directives ordering matters to be handled internally or sensitive documents to be destroyed. For generations, these records were meticulously kept, but hidden from the public, the press, and even external legal authorities. It wasn't until 2002, when the child abuse scandal within the Boston Archdiocese exploded, that a portion of the truth began to surface. A U.S. court forced the local church to release relevant documents, and part of what resembled the contents of Canon 489 came to light. What people saw was a long chain of cover-ups, priests quietly reassigned, victims told to remain silent, and letters from high-ranking officials confirming that the misconduct was known, but never made public. Still, the majority of the Canon 489 files have never been disclosed. Only a select few individuals within the Vatican have access, and those who have worked near the archive are bound by strict oaths of absolute secrecy. What troubles many is not just the fact that such wrongdoing occurred, but that it was so carefully documented, yet deliberately kept in the dark. If the Church truly seeks purity and moral accountability, then what is the reason for holding on so tightly to these files? Father Walter Cicek, a Jesuit spy who passed through the shadows of the Soviet Union. Walter Cicek was born in 1904 in the town of Shenandoah, Pennsylvania. His family were Polish immigrants living in a tight-knit Catholic community. From a young age, Cicek felt a deep calling to become a priest. In 1928, he officially joined the Jesuit order, and by 1937, he was ordained. At that time, the world stood on the brink of war. When World War II broke out, Cicek believed he had a mission to bring the Catholic faith to the Soviet Union, a place where religion was being violently suppressed by the state. Determined, he studied the Russian language and disguised himself as an ordinary laborer. Using forged documents, he crossed the border into the USSR in secret. His goal was to serve as a priest in silence, spreading faith behind enemy lines. But just a few years later, in 1941, he was arrested by Soviet security forces. They accused him of being a Vatican spy. Cicek was taken to the infamous Lubyanka prison in Moscow, known for its brutal interrogations and drawn-out investigations. He was held there for 5 years, most of it in solitary confinement. He did not know whether he would live or die. Yet despite everything, he held firmly to his faith, praying daily even in the darkness. Eventually, he was sentenced to 15 years of hard labor in Siberia. The conditions in the labor camps were so harsh that many did not survive a single winter. But Father Cicek did more than survive. He found ways to continue his priestly mission. He heard confessions, offered comfort, and organized secret prayer services for the other prisoners, even as he endured hunger, cold, and exhaustion himself. In 1955, his sentence was reduced for exceeding labor quotas. However, he was not released. Instead, he was forced to live in a remote industrial town, working in a chemical plant. His family in the United States had no idea he was still alive. They had long believed he was dead. Then, in the early 1960s, they unexpectedly received a letter from him. With the intervention of President John F. Kennedy, a prisoner exchange was arranged in 1963. Walter Cicek was finally freed after spending 23 years behind the Iron Curtain. He returned to the United States to the astonishment and admiration of many. Despite having lived under constant danger and being treated as an enemy of the state, Father Cicek harbored no bitterness. Instead, he chose a quiet life, continuing to teach and write. His 2 memoirs, With God in Russia and He Leadeth Me, do more than recount the story of a man imprisoned and exiled. They offer a profound reflection on faith, endurance, and sacrifice in the face of unimaginable trials. The religion of Homo erectus. If we travel back hundreds of thousands of years to a time before writing, before structured language, and before organized society, one might ask, did religion already exist? Some researchers believe the answer could very well be yes. Homo erectus was an early human species that lived roughly 1.5 to 2 million years ago. They knew how to use tools, mastered fire, and walked upright. These abilities suggest they did not merely act on instinct, but had begun to develop a sense of structure and community. And once humans started living in groups, sharing food, and building relationships, it's entirely possible they also began to form primitive systems of belief. Though Homo erectus left behind no scriptures or temples, certain archaeological discoveries have led scientists to reconsider what they thought they knew. For example, in Indonesia, archaeologists have unearthed skulls with openings cut into the crown. These were not the result of natural forces. They may have been part of a ritual or a sign of reverence for the dead. Some even speculate that it could have been a spiritual form of cannibalism, not merely for survival, but to fulfill a religious or symbolic purpose. In caves throughout parts of Europe, remains of bears have been found arranged in deliberate formations. This once gave rise to the theory that Homo erectus, or other archaic humans, worshipped bears as sacred symbols. Later, some researchers argued that geological shifts might have altered the positioning of the bones, yet the possibility of a religious ritual was never fully ruled out. Another theory proposes that Homo erectus may have practiced an early form of shamanism, an ancient belief system centered around ritual, herbal medicine, and spiritual experience. Some researchers have suggested that they might have used hallucinogenic mushrooms to communicate with the invisible world. Even today, the use of such substances for spiritual purposes still exists among various indigenous tribes. In addition, objects such as engraved seashells, figurines, or stones marked with traces of red pigment point toward an early human understanding of symbolism and ritual. Though it may not qualify as religion in the way we define it now, it could represent the beginning of a spiritual need that has accompanied humanity since the dawn of consciousness. And if Homo erectus truly did have religion, did they believe in invisible forces? Did they honor the dead? And if their rituals were indeed pagan in nature, then by modern Catholic belief, would they be eligible for salvation? Pope Nicholas V and the origins of the transatlantic slave trade. The histories of religion and politics have, at times, been so deeply intertwined that it becomes difficult to tell where one ends and the other begins. And occasionally, decisions made in the name of faith have set into motion consequences that would echo for centuries. One such example is the decree issued by Pope Nicholas V in the 15th century, an act that would lay the groundwork for one of the darkest chapters in human history, the transatlantic slave trade. In the mid-1400s, Portugal began expanding its influence into West Africa. At first, Portuguese captains, such as Antão Gonçalves, were primarily in search of resources, animal hides, oil, and other goods for trade. But everything changed when Gonçalves captured 2 Berber individuals on the Cap Blanc Peninsula in what is now Mauritania. Upon being brought back to Lisbon, the captives made an unexpected offer. In exchange for their own freedom, they promised to deliver 10 other Africans. And with that proposal, the idea of trading in human lives became a part of commercial practice. At that time, the legality of capturing and selling people was still unclear, especially in the religious context. Medieval laws on the Iberian Peninsula did address the treatment of Muslims, Jews, and certain groups of Christians, but when it came to those considered outside of known religions, the legal framework was all but silent. This is where Pope Nicholas V intervened. In 1452 and again in 1455, he issued 2 pivotal papal bulls, Dum Diversus and Romanus Pontifex. In these documents, he officially granted the King of Portugal the right to invade, capture, and subjugate all pagans and non-believers into perpetual slavery. In other words, if someone did not adhere to Christianity, Portugal was authorized to seize and trade them without it being viewed as a violation of moral or legal standards. This decree set a dangerous precedent. Portugal rapidly expanded its slave-raiding operations throughout West Africa. Soon after, other European powers, including Spain, France, England, and the Netherlands, followed suit. Within a few short centuries, millions of Africans were forcibly taken across the Atlantic, sold into plantations across the Americas, and treated not as people, but as property. Ironically, the same papal bull issued by Nicholas V also acknowledged that non-Christians, if converted to Christianity, might be treated differently. Some African kingdoms, such as the Kingdom of Congo, used this clause to negotiate with European powers in hopes of limiting the impact of slave trading on their territories. Looking back, it is clear that the decision of Pope Nicholas V was neither a purely political move nor a purely religious one. It was a historical turning point, one that helped normalize and legitimize an institution the world now universally condemns as a crime against humanity. The true mystery of Saint-Sulpice Church. When people think of sacred sites in Paris, most immediately picture the famed Notre Dame Cathedral. However, there is another church, less well known, yet equally steeped in mystery, Saint-Sulpice. In Dan Brown's novel The Da Vinci Code, Saint-Sulpice is portrayed as a critical link in the search for the Holy Grail. Many readers were captivated by the idea that the church concealed coded messages, secret maps, and ancient religious symbols. After the book's release, thousands of tourists flocked to the site, hoping to uncover traces of a hidden mystery carved into stone. But upon closer examination, the truth turns out to be far less fantastical than fiction suggests. One of the most frequently misunderstood elements is the Paris Meridian, a brass line embedded in the church floor, which Dan Brown refers to as the Rose Line. In the novel, it's described as part of a secret map leading to the treasure of the Knights Templar. In reality, it is an astronomical device known as a gnomon, installed in the 18th century. It was used to mark the winter solstice and track the passage of time. It has no connection whatsoever to esoteric symbols or secret societies. Another feature often misinterpreted is the painting titled Saint Michael Defeating the Dragon, which hangs inside the church. In the novel, it's read as a cryptic message from the Knights Templar, allegedly hinting at the downfall of the French monarchy. In truth, it is a standard motif in Catholic art, the Archangel Michael triumphing over the devil, a depiction of the eternal struggle between good and evil. That said, Saint-Sulpice remains well worth visiting, not for myths or hidden codes, but for its genuine cultural and historical significance. The church has hosted major ceremonies throughout France's history. Prominent figures like Robespierre and Victor Hugo once walked its corridors. Some of the chapels inside still retain their 18th century architecture and original artworks, including the Chapel of Our Lady, a space once reserved for the poorest members of the parish. The God Horus and Jesus Christ. For centuries, the life story of Jesus Christ has stood as the cornerstone of Christian faith. Yet, some scholars and researchers argue that this story bears notable similarities to an ancient Egyptian myth, the legend of the god Horus. According to Egyptian tradition, Horus was the son of the goddess Isis. It is said that Isis conceived Horus after the death of her husband Osiris. His birth was portrayed as both miraculous and divine. In certain versions of the myth, he was born in a secluded place, witnessed by shepherds and protected by the gods. The early years of Horus are sparsely documented, mirroring the gap in the Bible concerning Jesus' life between the ages of 12 and 30. As Horus came of age, he embarked on a battle against evil to restore justice for his slain father. Some accounts suggest that he was accompanied by 12 followers and performed extraordinary acts such as healing the sick, casting out demons, and saving lives. Because of these parallels, many have asked the question, could the story of Jesus have been influenced in part by the myth of Horus? However, serious scholars contend that there is no concrete evidence to support this theory. Many of the details often cited in the comparison were added in later periods and are not found in original Egyptian texts. For instance, no ancient records confirm that Horus had 12 disciples or that he was crucified and resurrected. Furthermore, the concept of baptism did not exist in Egyptian religion in the same sense it does within Christianity. What is evident, however, is that both narratives center around a divine figure with a redemptive mission who suffers and ultimately returns in triumph. The Horus hypothesis remains one of the more intriguing modern comparisons. It does not seek to discredit religious belief, but rather highlights how ancient civilizations may have influenced one another in ways we are only beginning to understand. The Pope's Egyptian Museum. Nestled within the heart of the Vatican lies a lesser-known collection, one that carries with it layers of complex history. This museum was established in 1839 during the papacy of Gregory XVI. Its original purpose was to display ancient Egyptian artifacts, many of which had once been held as personal possessions in the private residence of Pope Pius IV at the Belvedere Palace. The collection here is not only vast, but remarkably distinctive. Many of the artifacts date back to the era of ancient Egypt, brought to Europe in the wake of major historical upheavals, particularly following the Battle of Actium in 31 BCE. That battle marked the defeat of the alliance between Cleopatra and Mark Antony at the hands of the Roman Empire, resulting in Egypt's loss of independence and its absorption into Rome. After that victory, Romans began transporting a vast array of items from Egypt: statues of deities, ceramic vessels, mummies, and religious relics. Over time, many of these objects ended up in the hands of the popes and were eventually assembled into the museum that visitors can see today. However, the origins of these artifacts have long been a source of controversy. Though they are well preserved and publicly displayed, many scholars and Egyptian citizens view them as war spoils, objects taken during a period of invasion and loss of sovereignty. To this day, the majority of these items remain in the Vatican and have not been returned to their original homeland. So the question remains, is preserving ancient heritage in foreign museums an act of cultural protection? Or is it the continuation of imperial power under another name? The Vatican may claim these items as part of humanity's shared legacy, but for Egypt, they remain sacred fragments of memory, taken and never returned. The forbidden manuscript, First Apocalypse of James. In 2017, amid crumbling sheets of papyrus and discarded tax records from the 5th century, archaeologists uncovered an ancient text that had been banned by the Church for centuries. The manuscript is titled First Apocalypse of James. Though its content directly concerns Jesus and his disciples, this document never appeared in any official version of the Bible. Perhaps that is because it contained ideas considered dangerous, ideas that challenged the dominant religious doctrines of the time. The manuscript, written in Greek on weathered papyrus, was discovered in an ancient rubbish heap near a monastery in Egypt. While it was found alongside mundane items like receipts for chariot rentals and invoices for donkey feed, the content of the manuscript carried profound religious and philosophical weight. It recounts secret teachings that Jesus imparted solely to James, a disciple portrayed as someone who had inherited deep knowledge about the true nature of existence. In this text, the world is not depicted as the creation of an all-powerful and benevolent God. Instead, it is said to have been formed by a malevolent being, a false deity who constructed reality as a prison for the human soul. This worldview runs counter to the entire foundation of traditional Christian theology and would have almost certainly been condemned as heresy at the time it was written. Some modern scholars have even noted the eerie resemblance between this idea and the concept of a virtual world seen in science fiction, such as The Matrix, where humanity lives in a fabricated reality controlled by an unseen force. Beyond its controversial message, the manuscript's physical form offers additional insight. The lines are evenly spaced, and each syllable is carefully marked, suggesting that it may have been used as a teaching tool. The fact that this text was found in a garbage heap, rather than preserved in an archive or library, says something about how dissident ideas were treated. It reflects how teachings that did not align with orthodoxy were not just exiled from religious life, but also erased from humanity's collective memory. Was the body of Alexander the Great hidden by the Vatican? For more than 2,000 years, the final resting place of Alexander the Great has remained one of history's greatest mysteries. Despite being one of the most powerful and revered figures of the ancient world, his tomb vanished without a trace. Archaeologists have searched in vain for centuries, but there is one theory, highly controversial, that offers a surprising explanation: that Alexander's body still exists, not in Egypt, but in Italy, hidden within one of Europe's most iconic churches. According to this theory, after Alexander the Great died in 323 BCE, his body was first buried in Memphis, Egypt, and later transferred to Alexandria, the city he himself had founded and where he had wished to be laid to rest. For centuries, his tomb became a pilgrimage site for kings, emperors, and scholars alike. But at some unknown point in history, it disappeared entirely from the historical record. Some researchers believe that his body was not truly lost, but secretly relocated. The theory proposes that during the Middle Ages, a Venetian merchant smuggled Alexander's remains out of Alexandria and brought them to Italy. Upon arrival in Venice, the body was mistaken for that of St. Mark and was buried in St. Mark's Basilica, which remains one of the most important religious destinations in Europe today. As bold as this theory may sound, it presents some thought-provoking arguments. First, after the 4th century, there are no reliable records of Alexander's tomb, despite its previous renown. Second, the body entombed in St. Mark's Basilica has never undergone full scientific examination. Its identity has been accepted on the basis of religious tradition and symbolic attribution, not on clear physical or historical evidence. Some argue that if this theory holds any truth, it would explain why no archaeological expedition has ever successfully located Alexander's tomb in Egypt, despite exhaustive and large-scale efforts. Of course, to this day, no definitive proof has confirmed that the body in St. Mark's Basilica is in fact Alexander the Great. The Vatican has never released any DNA testing or detailed study of the remains held there. But the fact that such questions persist only underscores one thing: history is not always as certain as we think, and sometimes the greatest figures of the ancient world may vanish right before our eyes. The statue of Anubis in a Roman cloak. Inside a quiet room of the Vatican's Egyptian Museum, surrounded by ancient mummies and time-worn black stone sculptures, stands an artifact that often causes visitors to linger longer than usual. It is a finely carved marble statue, nearly life-sized, depicting the Egyptian god Anubis, the ancient deity who guarded mummies and guided souls into the afterlife. But what sets the statue apart is not just its craftsmanship. It is the strange detail that Anubis, in this representation, is not wearing traditional Egyptian garments, but rather a Roman cloak, holding in his hands both an ancient Egyptian musical instrument and the caduceus, the staff associated with Hermes in Greek mythology. This unusual blending of cultural symbols is no accident. It reflects a distinct period in Roman history when the empire not only conquered Egypt by force, but also absorbed many of its religious rites, symbols, and ceremonial traditions. As part of this cultural fusion, deities were combined and reimagined to better integrate into the spiritual life of the Roman people. In this statue, Anubis still bears the jackal's head, but his body is that of a distinguished Roman citizen. In one hand, he holds the sistrum, a sacred rattle used in Egyptian rituals, and in the other, the caduceus of Hermes, symbolizing communication between the world of the living and the dead. This statue was not discovered in a temple or an archaeological site. Rather, it was crafted during the Roman era, likely as a decorative object intended for the home of a wealthy Roman patron. After centuries of changing hands, in 1749 the statue was gifted to Pope Benedict XIV, and it has since remained part of the Vatican's collection. The mummification of saints. In the minds of many Catholic believers, the incorruptibility of the human body after death has long been considered a sign of divine holiness. Some saints, after resting in the ground for years, were reportedly found in such pristine condition that many believed it to be a miracle. But in the modern era, not all such cases are the result of natural preservation. Within the Vatican, there has existed a process, quiet and methodical, for preserving the bodies of saints and popes, using techniques inspired by the ancient Egyptian tradition of mummification. Between 1975 and 2008, a group of specialists appointed by the Vatican carried out preservation procedures on at least 31 saints and venerated figures. This process was never widely publicized, but over time, certain details have emerged. The goal was to prevent decomposition and ensure that the bodies could be displayed in churches as enduring symbols of faith and spiritual permanence. One of the most striking examples is Pope John XXIII, who died in 1963, when his body was exhumed in 2001 to be placed in a glass coffin inside St. Peter's Basilica in the Vatican City. Peter's Basilica observers were astonished by its condition. His face retained its gentle expression, his skin remained unblemished, and his hands were peacefully folded over his chest as if he had just passed away. The Vatican did not confirm whether mummification had been used, but many experts believe his body had been carefully treated long before the public display. However, not every case went according to plan. One notable failure involved Pope Pius XII, who died in 1958. According to witnesses at the time, his body was improperly treated. When placed in a public viewing coffin, the corpse began to decompose rapidly. The odor was so overwhelming that a guard at the wake fainted. The Pope's nose collapsed, his skin darkened, and the funeral had to be cut short to avoid further scandal. The truth is that the Vatican has continued to preserve the remains of important religious figures. For them, it is not merely about maintaining physical form, it is about preserving memory, embodying faith, and sustaining the presence of individuals who once profoundly shaped the spiritual life of millions. The heart of St. Camillus de Lellis, a relic of compassion. In the Catholic world, certain relics are not only revered as sacred objects, but stand as living symbols of faith, love, and sacrifice. One such relic is preserved today in the city of Naples, the actual heart of St. Camillus de Lellis. Camillus de Lellis was born in 1550 under less than fortunate circumstances. His father served as a soldier in the Spanish Royal Army, and his mother died when he was still a young child. Raised in hardship and instability, Camillus spent many of his early years adrift, immersed in gambling and a reckless lifestyle. At one point, he became a mercenary, and he was expelled from religious communities multiple times for failing to observe their rules. Yet, from the shadows of that life came a profound spiritual awakening. While receiving treatment for a wound at a hospital, Camillus became acutely aware of the pain, loneliness, and neglect suffered by the poor and sick. It was in that moment that he chose to transform his life entirely. He turned to faith, abandoned his vices, and began caring for the ill with a level of compassion rarely seen. Camillus was not merely a man of charity. In 1586, he founded a new religious order known as the Camillians, a group dedicated to serving the sick, the dying, and the forgotten. What made the Camillians extraordinary was their dual commitment to physical and spiritual care. They willingly entered plague zones, never feared death, and remained by the side of the suffering until the very end. Camillus once said, "Let your heart be in your hands when you serve the sick." This was not just a metaphor, it was the rule by which he lived. Camillus died in 1614 at the age of 64, having devoted his life entirely to the poor and the infirm. After his passing, it was decided that his heart would be preserved as a sacred relic. According to witnesses at the time, when surgeons removed his heart, they were stunned. It remained deep red, full, and appeared as if carved from precious stone, a rare condition in a body that had ceased to function. Though no one dared to officially declare it a miracle, for those of faith, it was a clear sign of sanctity. The heart was placed inside a box made of juniper wood and transported to Naples, once a central hub of Camillian ministry. Over the centuries, it has been carefully preserved and displayed in a small chapel that once served as a clinic founded by Camillus himself. Today, that place has become a church, and pilgrims from around the world still journey there to witness the relic. To the Catholic Church, the heart of St. Camillus is not merely a preserved organ. It is proof of a life wholly given to love and service. It is the emblem of a heart that remained open, always, to embrace those in pain and in need of care. The Museum of the Holy Souls in Purgatory. In the heart of Rome lies a place few people know about. It is not a celebrated art museum or a grand cathedral, but rather a small, quiet, and haunting space. It bears a curious name, the Museum of the Holy Souls in Purgatory. This museum is located within a section of the Church of the Sacred Heart of Suffrage, del Sacro Cuore del Suffragio. The church itself, built in the late 19th century in gray Gothic stone, sits humbly along a quiet street. On November 15, 1897, a fire broke out in a small chapel within the church. The flames were quickly extinguished, but once the smoke cleared, something unusual was discovered. On a scorched section of the wall, priests and parishioners noticed what looked like the image of a human face, as if someone had reached out from the other side of the living world to leave a mark. The priest at the time, Father Victor Jouet, believed this was a sign from a soul in purgatory. Deeply moved by the discovery, Father Jouet became obsessed. He began collecting similar evidence, not only in Rome, but across various parts of Europe. He wanted to understand whether souls trapped in purgatory were truly trying to communicate with the living. The result was a strange, yet very real collection. Inside the museum, one can find dozens of objects, prayer books, priestly garments, wooden tables, linens. All bear mysterious burn marks, scorched handprints, fingerprint impressions, and shapes seemingly seared into them by fire. A prayer book shows a blackened handprint in its center. A linen apron bears deep, dark finger marks, as if someone had clutched it in desperation. According to Catholic doctrine, purgatory is not hell. It is a place for souls who are not yet pure enough to enter heaven, but who are not condemned to eternal punishment either. It is a realm of purification, of cleansing sin before salvation. Crucially, souls in purgatory cannot help themselves. They depend on the living, through prayers, masses, and acts of charity done in their name. This is why many believers hold that these souls may attempt to reach out, seeking aid from those still among the living. The marks left behind in this museum are seen as messages from beyond. Not everyone believes in purgatory or in the possibility of contact between the dead and the living, but the artifacts preserved in this museum compel visitors to pause and reflect. Whether seen as supernatural signs or psychological imprints, they remain enduring reminders of love, sorrow, and the mystery that lies between two worlds. The brain of Don Bosco. In 2017, a strange and unexpected theft occurred at a small shrine in Italy. The target wasn't gold, jewels, or priceless relics, but a fragment of a saint's brain. As unbelievable as it sounds, the story is true. The brain belonged to Saint John Bosco, one of the most revered figures in the history of modern Catholicism. John Bosco, affectionately known as Don Bosco, was born in 1815 in northern Italy. He grew up in poverty, lost his father at a young age, and began working early in life to support himself. But it was from these early struggles that he developed a deep compassion for poor, orphaned, and marginalized children. After becoming a priest, Don Bosco dedicated his life to helping young people, especially those society had deemed beyond saving. He opened schools, vocational workshops, and built an educational system that was both disciplined and compassionate. No child was beaten, no one was excluded. His approach to education later became the foundation of the Salesian Order, which continues to serve youth around the world today. What made Don Bosco especially unique was his ability to reach children not just through textbooks, but through performance and creativity. He knew magic tricks, performed acrobatics, and told captivating stories, all to capture the hearts of even the most difficult children. For this reason, he is also recognized as the patron saint of magicians. Don Bosco died in 1888. After his canonization in 1934, parts of his body were preserved as sacred relics and placed on display at the Basilica of Colle Don Bosco, built on the site of his birth. For decades, everything remained undisturbed until one summer afternoon in 2017. That day, a 42-year-old man secretly entered the shrine. He removed the sealed glass reliquary containing Don Bosco's brain and disappeared without a trace. The news quickly spread, sending shockwaves through the Catholic world. This wasn't just the theft of a religious artifact, it was a desecration of someone millions regarded as a symbol of faith and hope. The motive behind the theft later came to light. The perpetrator believed the relic container was made of solid gold and hoped to sell it on the black market. In reality, the brain fragment was encased in plain glass and wrapped in common materials with little monetary value. With the help of fingerprint evidence and security camera footage, authorities were able to trace the suspect. Within days, they found the brain hidden inside a brass teapot in the man's apartment near the city of Turin. Fortunately, the seal on the relic had not been broken. After a thorough inspection, the sacred item was returned to the church and placed back on display for pilgrims and worshippers. Today, when people speak of Don Bosco, they remember not only the schools, the lives he saved, and the lessons in compassion he taught, but also this strange theft, which served as a reminder. Some relics may hold little material worth, but their spiritual value surpasses anything that can be measured. The sarcophagus of St. Helena. In the history of Christianity, there are figures whose importance doesn't lie in preaching sermons, founding denominations, or writing scripture, but in how their actions reshaped the very path of faith itself. St. Helena was one such figure. She was not a cleric nor a theologian, but the mother of Emperor Constantine, the first Roman ruler to legalize Christianity within the empire. And it was she who is believed to have discovered the true cross, the very cross upon which Jesus Christ was crucified. Helena was born around the year 250 AD into a humble, non-aristocratic family. She married a Roman general and would later give birth to Constantine. After her son rose to power as emperor, Helena was granted the title of Augusta, an honorary empress. But rather than embrace a life of imperial luxury, she chose a different path, one of faith and devotion. She converted to Christianity later in life and spent her remaining years on pilgrimages, building churches, and seeking out sacred relics. In the year 326, Helena arrived in Jerusalem on a spiritual mission. According to tradition, during her journey, she unearthed 3 wooden crosses buried beneath the ruins of a former pagan temple. To determine which one was the true cross, she instructed that each be placed upon a dying woman. When the 3rd cross was laid on her, the woman unexpectedly recovered. People believed it to be a miracle. The true cross had been found. From that moment on, Helena was venerated as the woman who had rediscovered the crucifix. After her death around the year 330, her body was interred in a sarcophagus made of deep red porphyry, a stone so rare and precious that it was typically reserved for royalty and emperors. The sarcophagus itself is elaborately carved with scenes of soldiers, horses, and battlefields. Strangely, these images seem at odds with the life of faith and charity led by Helena. Some historians believe the tomb was originally crafted for Emperor Constantine himself, but was later reassigned to his mother. Perhaps it was his way of honoring the woman who had given him both life and faith. But Helena's journey did not end in peaceful rest. During the Middle Ages, a wave of relic fever swept through Europe. Churches, monasteries, and noble families all sought to possess bodily remains of the saints, believing they brought blessings and divine prestige. Helena became one of the many saints whose remains were caught in this frenzy. Her bones were gradually removed, divided, and scattered across various places. Today, part of her remains are kept in the Church of Saint-Leu-Saint-Gilles in Paris. Another portion is preserved at the Basilica di Santa Maria in Aracoeli in Rome. and smaller fragments are said to reside in Trier, Germany, a city that once served as the western capital of the Roman Empire during Constantine's reign. The tale grows even more curious. Some records suggest that during the Fourth Crusade, Venetian warriors stole a part of Helena's remains and transported them to a small island named Sant'Elena. There, they built a church to house the relics, as a sacred emblem of faith and victory. To this day, no one can say for certain whether these scattered remains all belong to the same woman, but perhaps that no longer matters. What makes Helena unforgettable is not the location of her bones, but the depth of her belief, her devotion, and the journey she began over 1,700 years ago to recover one of Christianity's most sacred symbols. The Pope's Elephant. In 1514, Portugal was expanding its global trade influence. As a rising maritime empire, the Portuguese weren't just sending expeditions across the Indian Ocean. They also sought favor with the Pope in Rome, who held tremendous power in deciding how newly discovered territories would be divided among Catholic nations. To impress the Vatican, King Manuel I of Portugal organized a grand diplomatic mission to Rome. Among the lavish gifts, gold, jewels, silk, and spices, the one that left all of Rome speechless was a 4-year-old Asian elephant named Hanno. At a time when most Europeans had never seen an elephant in their lives, Hanno became an instant sensation. The elephant was brought from the port of Civitavecchia into the Vatican, passing through the crowded streets of Rome. People flooded the roads just to catch a glimpse of the strange creature. Many climbed onto rooftops, some of which collapsed under the weight of the crowds. The spectacle of Hanno moving from street to street plunged the city into chaos for several days. When Hanno finally arrived at the Vatican and appeared before Pope Leo X, the event became even more extraordinary. Draped in silk, bearing a small ceremonial tower on its back, Hanno bowed respectfully before the Pope, an act it had been carefully trained to perform. Then, as a unique gesture of greeting, the elephant sprayed water from its trunk, sending the crowd into a frenzy. Pope Leo X was instantly enchanted. For the next 3 years, Hanno lived in the Vatican grounds and was treated like an international celebrity. A special enclosure was built for him, caretakers were hired, and artists were commissioned to paint and sculpt his likeness. Hanno became a living symbol, not only of the exotic wonders beyond Europe, but also of the papacy's global reach and grandeur. But the joy would not last. In 1516, Hanno suddenly fell ill. Though the exact cause remains unclear, some historical accounts suggest the elephant may have been fed gold and other precious metals as part of a misguided royal diet. Whether due to superstition or naivety, this practice may have severely damaged Hanno's digestive system. Not long after, he died at the age of just 7. Pope Leo X was heartbroken. He wrote a moving elegy in Hanno's memory and had the elephant buried within the Vatican's Cortile del Belvedere. He also commissioned the famed artist Raphael to paint a fresco of Hanno to hang in the papal palace, ensuring that this special friend would never be forgotten by the Eternal City. For centuries, the story of Hanno faded from memory. But in 1962, during restoration work in the Vatican gardens, workers unexpectedly discovered a large, unusual elephant jawbone and teeth. After comparing the remains with historical records, experts confirmed that these were the bones of Hanno, the legendary elephant who once mesmerized the city of Rome more than 400 years earlier. The remaining bones are still preserved today, but the whereabouts of his 2 tusks remain a mystery. No one knows where they were taken, whether they hang silently in a private gallery or lie buried in some forgotten archive. The Devil's Face, a hidden mystery in Giotto's fresco. At the Basilica of St. Francis, home to one of the most important collections of religious frescoes in Europe, a mystery has silently lingered for centuries. It wasn't until modern times, with the help of technology and keen observation, that people realized a demonic face was hidden among the clouds in one of the church's most revered paintings. The fresco in question is part of a series that illustrates the life of St. Francis, the founder of the Franciscan order and one of the most beloved saints in Catholic history. These frescoes have long been attributed to Giotto di Bondone, a master painter of the late 13th century, who is often considered the father of Renaissance art. Giotto was among the first artists to transform religious imagery from symbolic icons into lifelike human figures, imbued with emotion, movement, and depth. However, in fresco number 20, depicting the death of St. Francis, a demonic face was discovered lurking in a cloud near the center of the image. From the floor of the basilica, it is virtually impossible to see, but when the painting was magnified and examined closely, the face came into view, complete with horns, a hooked nose, and a sinister smile. Why would such an image appear in a sacred religious artwork? Some experts believe it may have been a mischievous prank by the artist, similar to how medieval painters occasionally left hidden fingerprints or secret messages within their work. Others suggest the demonic face could symbolize the presence of evil lingering near the soul, a reminder that even at the moment of death, temptation and darkness do not easily let go. There is even a theory that the artist may have used the likeness of a personal enemy to create the devil's face as a clever form of revenge preserved for eternity. But a deeper question remains: was this fresco truly painted by Giotto himself? Some art historians argue that the style differs noticeably from his more widely accepted works, most notably the famous fresco cycle in the Arena Chapel in Padua. They speculate that a student of Giotto's or perhaps another contemporary artist may have completed most of the work at Assisi. Yet regardless of who the true artist was, the demonic face remains. What is striking is that for centuries, millions stood before this painting, praying, admiring, contemplating, without ever noticing anything unusual. Only with the advent of modern imaging technology did this strange detail come to light. Today, the devil's face in the fresco is no longer a secret, but it remains an unsolved mystery. The Roman Curia, the government behind the Vatican. When most people think of the Vatican, they imagine a sacred place, the residence of the Pope and the spiritual center of the Catholic Church. But few realize that behind that religious veil lies an organizational structure that functions much like a government. That structure is called the Roman Curia. It is the administrative body that assists the Pope in running the affairs of the Vatican. If the Pope were a president, then the Curia would be his cabinet. They are responsible for everything: appointing bishops, declaring saints, organizing major liturgical events, and handling complex matters of doctrine and faith. The Roman Curia is made up of 9 major departments, known as congregations. The oldest among them is the Congregation for the Doctrine of the Faith, established in 1542. In its early days, it operated as the Office of the Inquisition, the tribunal that judged those accused of heresy. Today, it still holds its core responsibility: defending the faith and doctrine of the Church. In addition, the Vatican maintains its own religious judicial system. One such body is the Supreme Tribunal of the Apostolic Penitentiary, which handles cases involving the gravest sins. The Vatican also operates 3 separate offices dedicated to working with different groups: Catholics, members of other religions, and even those who follow no religion at all. Many assume that the Vatican is merely a small religious center, but in truth, it functions as a sovereign state, with its own laws, legal structures, and administrative systems. And the Roman Curia is the quiet government that keeps everything running smoothly behind those ancient walls. The secretive economy of the Vatican. The Vatican is the smallest country in the world, yet its economy remains one of the most curious and least understood. No one knows exactly how much money the Vatican possesses, but everyone agrees it's a great deal. The largest source of income comes from a global donation known as Peter's Pence. This tradition began in the 8th century, when Catholics around the world were encouraged to give a small portion of their wealth to support the Pope and the Church's mission. That practice continues to this day. Every time you drop a few coins into the collection box at your local parish, it's very possible that money makes its way back to the Vatican. But what's even more intriguing is that the Vatican doesn't just hold its wealth, it invests it. Funds entrusted to the Pope are managed and invested across various sectors, including stocks, bonds, real estate, and even the New York Stock Exchange. The Vatican's investment portfolio spans everything from European financial firms to high-value properties in London and Paris. It also holds shares in major banks and global investment companies. However, the Vatican doesn't invest carelessly. It follows a clear ethical guideline: no investments that contradict Catholic teachings. For example, it avoids funding companies that produce contraceptives, weapons, or operate in industries considered morally questionable. In addition, the Vatican generates revenue through other channels, such as the sale of stamps, commemorative coins, museum tickets, and religious souvenirs. With millions of tourists visiting each year, admission fees from the Vatican museums alone contribute significantly to its income. Still, despite its strong investment presence and lucrative returns, the Vatican keeps its financial figures tightly guarded. Only in recent years, under the leadership of Pope Francis, have some reforms been introduced to bring greater transparency to its financial affairs. The treasure in the vault. Is the Vatican hiding gold from Jerusalem? It's well known that the Vatican houses a vast collection of documents and sacred relics, but some believe that hidden deep beneath those ancient stone corridors lies something even more extraordinary. One of the greatest religious treasures in human history, the lost treasure of the Jerusalem Temple. According to certain researchers, most notably Professor Tom Meyer, a biblical scholar from California, the sacred artifacts once held in the Jewish Temple of Jerusalem may have been looted by the Romans in 70 AD after they attacked the city and destroyed the holy site. Millions of Jews were killed, and priceless religious objects such as the seven-branched golden menorah, the altar, and other temple treasures were taken. No one knows for certain what happened to those artifacts, but according to some theories, they were transported to Rome, passed through generations, and ultimately ended up in the hands of the Vatican. And if that were true, the most secure place to hide such items would be in the Vatican's underground vaults, an area completely off limits to all but a very small group of carefully selected individuals. There is no concrete evidence to confirm this theory. Still, the idea has endured for centuries. Those who believe it claim that the Vatican may very well be hiding the most valuable items ever taken from the temple. Of course, the Vatican has never acknowledged any connection to such a treasure, and no one is allowed unrestricted access to its subterranean archives. That secrecy only fuels the speculation. After all, the less the world knows, the more reason there is to suspect that something truly extraordinary may be hidden away, just out of reach. Murder within the Vatican, a secret still unresolved. On May 4th, 1998, a shocking event unfolded in the very heart of the Vatican, a place long considered one of the holiest and safest locations in the world. The recently appointed commander of the Swiss Guard, Alois Estermann, along with his wife Gladys Meza Romero, was found dead in their apartment inside Vatican City. Lying near their bodies was a young guardsman named Cedric Tournay, who had also died from a gunshot wound to the head. According to the official statement released by the Vatican, Cedric was responsible for killing Estermann and his wife, allegedly due to a personal conflict, before turning the weapon on himself. The motive, according to Vatican officials, was rooted in Cedric's anger over not receiving a medal after being disciplined for violating military rules. They claimed he had lost control of his emotions and committed the violent act in a fit of rage. But what raised public suspicion was how swiftly the case was closed, and the fact that all information came solely from Vatican sources. Why was such a serious murder investigation wrapped up so quickly? Some journalists and researchers uncovered clues suggesting that Estermann may have been connected to sensitive internal affairs, possibly involving political ties or financial secrets within the Vatican. For many, the incident seemed far more complex than the version presented to the public. The Swiss Guard, silent warriors who protect the Pope. When you visit the Vatican, it's easy to spot the brightly dressed soldiers standing guard outside the grand gates. These are the Swiss Guard, the Pope's personal protectors. With their traditional helmets, polished armor, and long spears, many assume they're merely ceremonial, present for photos and pageantry. But few know that the Swiss Guard were once real warriors, and they have shed blood to defend the Pope from death. The story goes back to the year 1527, when Holy Roman Emperor Charles V could no longer afford to pay his massive army. The unpaid troops revolted, turning their sights on Rome with the intention of looting it as payment. On May 6th, tens of thousands of mercenaries launched a brutal assault on the city. Facing them were only about 5,000 Roman militiamen and 189 Swiss guards. They knew they stood no chance of victory, but they did not retreat. As enemy forces breached the walls, the Swiss Guard held their ground. They fought to the last man, buying enough time for Pope Clement VII to escape through a secret underground passage. In the end, only 40 Swiss Guards survived, and it was they who escorted the Pope to safety. The rest had fallen, sacrificing their lives in a desperate yet honorable stand. From that day forward, the Swiss Guard were no longer just hired soldiers from Switzerland. They became an elite force, unwaveringly loyal to the Pope and an inseparable part of the Vatican's history and legend. The Vatican's vast gold reserves. According to a 2014 report by the International Business Times, the Vatican holds approximately $20 million worth of gold at the US Federal Reserve. But that is only the tip of the iceberg. Experts believe the real figure could reach tens of billions of dollars when accounting for gold and other valuable assets stored in various countries around the world. The Vatican does not publicly disclose exact numbers. However, based on independent sources, it is estimated that the Holy See may control around $764 million in cash and securities and manage over $64 billion in global assets. These may include real estate, investment holdings, and religious artifacts made from solid gold, many of which are considered priceless. Some experts go further, estimating that the Vatican's physical gold alone could be worth approximately $50 billion. If that figure is accurate, it means that even if the global financial system were to collapse, the Vatican would remain financially secure. Where did all this gold come from? Part of it comes from centuries of donations. Another portion has been accumulated through investments and financial returns. But a significant share originates from the Church's long and powerful history, when the Vatican stood at the center of European authority and amassed enormous wealth during the Middle Ages. Today, people may debate how the Vatican chooses to use its resources, but one thing is undeniable. The Vatican is one of the wealthiest institutions on the planet, and the gold it holds ensures its financial strength under any circumstance. Thank you for staying with us until the end of today's video. Was there something that caught your interest or made you want to share your thoughts? Don't forget to subscribe to the channel and turn on notifications so you won't miss any of our upcoming stories. We'll see you in the next video.